share the screen.
Share the screen.
There we go. Is it showing now?
No, not yet.
There we go.
There, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can't say good morning anymore because I'm not sure if it's morning or afternoon. I understand there's quite a lot of people from international destinations and not just in South Africa. So welcome to you all. It's nice to speak to you. I think all of you, or most of you at least, are at the early stages of your geological careers and looking for advice and information on how to progress your lives and careers going forward. I guess that's why you're here. And in this presentation, I'm going to try to give you some perspective at this early stage about your career choice and what to look forward to going ahead. It may be hard to believe, but at one time I was like you, getting ready to start on my career as a geologist. I had a degree from what was accepted as a good university, but had very little in the way of practical experience, except for some vacation work. And I'm sure lots of you are in the same sort of boat. And there I was, leaving my familiar environment and heading off to a different continent and getting ready to become involved in diamond exploration, about which I knew very little, or more truthfully, next to nothing at that time. I guess all of us are hostages of our environment to some extent or other, and none of us know what the future will hold. So in this presentation, I'm going to comment on how I see the state of geology in South Africa at the moment and the outlook for the future, and the rest will be up to you. So the agenda is simple: a bit about geology and how we're sometimes viewed by the world at large, some comments and context on our South African geological heritage, and I go slightly beyond the South African borders in this presentation, a short commentary on aspects of the South African minerals industry, geology as a career, and some closing comments. Working as a geologist isn't a run-of-the-mill job, and having been in industry now for more than 47 years, in my experience, other people tend to be very interested to hear about what I do for a living and what geology is all about. Nevertheless, we have our detractors, some serious and others not so serious. And if you Google geology and science, you bring up some interesting views. You can see Dilbert's opinion there on the slide. As is often the case in real life, he's at least half right, but I'll leave other interpretation to your discretion. The other opinions shown here are also bandied about from time to time, the most extreme view being that of Ernest Rutherford, about 100 years ago, who's regarded as the father of nuclear science, who regarded physics as the only science. Sheldon Cooper of Big Bang Theory fame shared Rutherford's view, and in an episode when his paintball team was taken out by a team of geologists, declared that geology is not a real science. In a later episode, he confirmed his opinion by describing geology as the Kardashians of science, i.e., not the real thing. So we have to be prepared to defend our patch, if only because our detractors' comments, in my opinion, are probably more often driven by jealousy and envy than anything else. In our modern world, driven by expectations of everything needing to be so never changing and perfect, it's difficult for most people to relate to the timescale we as geologists work with. For us, what does the odd 10 million years or so matter? Others ask, how can we be sure of anything? How can geology be real when nothing ever happens apart from maybe the odd earthquake, a volcano now and again, and other similar sort of incidents? Also in the mineral industry, the modes of formation of mineral deposits are not always clear-cut and difficult for non-geologists to understand. All of this, of course, revolves around the concept of uncertainty, and that's part and parcel of the subject of geology. Very little is absolutely certain, and it's always subject to interpretation and the available facts, and that's not going to change. But people's opinions about geology and geologists are changing. Certainly in my lifetime, an explosion in the number of geological scientific observations being made daily, and not only by geologists, confirms that the Earth is a dynamic and living system, and that our understanding and experience of the big picture in terms of geological and Earth history is very limited, but improving continuously. The ubiquity of cell phone cameras has in the last 10 years allowed sharing of events that when I was at school and university could only be read or theorized about in textbooks or historical records as uncommon natural disasters, tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the like. So it's impossible to ignore the simple fact that geology is universal. It's all around us, and in saying that, we're not just limiting ourselves to our own planet. Just think about the pictures from the Mars rover and the observations being made on the surface of the planet. A geologist was, after all, the first scientist to visit the moon. From the earliest times, geology has provided many of our basic needs: stone tools, clay and other soil materials for agriculture, building, writing tablets, pigments, and manufacture of pottery and paper. Metals also for agriculture and tools and weapons, as well as coinage, providing the drive for economic growth and development. Coal and oil that drove the Industrial Revolution, and that will continue to do so for some time to come. Mineral exploitation often gets a very bad press, but in our modern society, the minerals that support our fourth industrial revolution are all born out of our geological endeavors, be they wind turbines, solar panels, or high-tech batteries. Without geological inputs, Elon Musk won't be able to power his Teslas or put his SpaceX rockets into space. This slide summarizes my opinions, and I hope those of all of you too, about the important and all-embracing role of geology. It's an all-encompassing as a science, and we'll come back to that in later slides. It's a key natural earth and science. It requires commitment to working in all sorts of environments. And here in the picture down on the right-hand side, we see astronaut Dr. Jack Smith examining a loose boulder on the moon and probably wondering how he's going to fit it into his lunar module to take all the way home to Earth. So Sheldon, there's no doubting that geology is a real science. But welcome to the team anyway, even if it is reluctantly, and you had to get drunk before getting that far, which tells you something about Dilbert being right. We geologists have a special knowledge about the Earth. And as time goes on, the importance of geology and related earth sciences will continue to become more and more evident. The acknowledged fathers of the science of geology, James Hutton and Charles Lyell, considered that the present is the key to the past. And I guess by the same token, the past may also be considered to be the key to the present, or perhaps more correctly, the future. If our geological observations show that what we see today happened in the past, then what we observe as having happened in the past may be happening today and will in all likelihood occur again in the future. And that's the nature of the dynamic Earth system that we inhabit. But philosophizing about geology is not the subject for today, however interesting, but it does prove useful in setting the scene for how I hope you would see your futures developing. The nature of geology and its relative youthfulness as a science, particularly in a country like South Africa, and I guess you can go more broadly into Africa when you look at that as well, provides opportunity for new discoveries, new interpretations, and new understandings. Because we deal with old rocks and the science seems to be well-founded, we forget that until about 150 years ago, next to nothing was known in a formal sense about the geology of Southern Africa. What you see here on the left-hand side is a simplified version of the first geological map of the Union of South Africa, prepared almost 100 years ago for the 1929 International Geo-Congress held in Cape Town. If you compare it to any modern version of the same area, you'll find that none of the major elements have changed, except perhaps in interpretation. If you consider that prior to 1910, South Africa didn't exist as a unified country, what is more impressive is that this map represents the collaborative efforts of large numbers of scientists, prospectors, and other contributors from all walks of life in 50 or less years, using very primitive tools and technologies by today's standards. And this is evidence of the importance of advancing science and knowledge through collaboration, dedication, and perseverance. On a global scale, Alex du Toit and his seminal work on the theory of continental drift was built on collaboration with other scientists throughout the world, and not just geologists, and the work and ideas of previous workers, supported by observations from South America and other parts of the world. It may surprise many of you here to find out that what is now the well-accepted concept of plate tectonics only became accepted science in 50 to 60 years ago. It was only in the 1960s that the concept was put forward to provide a mechanism for the logic of du Toit's theory. That's not too long ago. Let's not forget about the evidence of older geological and mining activity in Southern Africa. And we can extend this to the rest of Africa as well, because there's certainly evidence of pre-colonial mining going on in parts of West Africa and other parts of the continent. And depicted here is a map that I found that was first compiled in 1929 and modified in 1936, and then published in a major publication by the University of Pretoria that deals with archaeological sites in Southern Africa. Some quite famous geological names listed there, Percy Wagner and C. van Riet Louw, from almost 100 years ago. And it shows the positions of identified pre-colonial era mining sites for a number of mineral commodities in the region, including iron, gold, tin at Rooiberg in South Africa, and copper at Palabora in South Africa, and in the copper belt in what is now Zambia and also the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a very interesting map that I don't think many people are aware of these days. So moving on to the business of geology, most of you are going to be involved, I guess, to some extent, one or other way in either exploration or mining. So let's look at mining in South Africa and your likely place in it, or your place in mining or exploration anywhere. Business of geology in South Africa is defined by the mining industry, which has driven the economic development of the subcontinent. And looking at South Africa's mineral endowment, gold was the backbone of the South African economy until just before the turn of this millennium. And South Africa now ranks 12th in terms of annual gold production as a result of the depth of the mining operations here, the high operating costs, safety-related issues, and the high investment costs of new developments. This is down from 8th position the last time I gave this presentation, which was just a year ago. So gold production remains important, but South Africa now produces only 2.8% of the world's gold supply, compared to 76% in 1970. As things stand, without major new investment in South Africa's gold production, it's likely to decline even further in the future. Looking at mineral production by value, and this slide is incorrect, it's actually 2020, apologies for that. What we see in the chart on the left-hand side is South African mineral production is no longer just about gold. And we see there coal, PGMs, gold, iron ore, manganese, chrome, building materials, and other metals. Coal was the biggest earner in 2020, followed by PGMs. Surprisingly, iron ore accounted for almost as much revenue as gold. And this, allied to manganese production, shows South Africa's potential as a producer of quality bulk commodities. Although the chart shows increasing value over time from 2018 down to 2020 here, we see a big dip in the early part of 2020, coinciding with the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. But things picked up again fairly quickly once the lockdowns were released on the mining industry. And on the right-hand side, you see here a plot of the value and tonnage of commodity exports out of South Africa, where the brown is the rand value and the yellow is the volume, the tonnages. And we see a huge upkick in the post-COVID dip, after the post-COVID dip here in early 2020. Certainly moving at a much higher trajectory than for the previous couple of years. So this strong recovery looks very good for the future. Some of you may become involved in exploration. This is about finding new deposits and continuously replacing mineral reserves that are being depleted annually. As you can see on the chart here, exploration expenditure in South Africa has been underperforming for some time for various reasons. And the levels of spend now in US dollar terms is almost at a 20-year low, comparing 2020 here. So it's very similar to where we were in either 2002 or in 1998. So this is obviously of concern. You can see the trend there with increasing up until 2007. And what this trend is showing is really the lack of interest in South Africa now as a destination for exploration expenditure. And some of these, although it's attractive from a geological perspective, it's not being viewed favorably as an investment destination due to concerns related to security of tenure and perceived investment risk. So a lot of exploration spend that should have been coming to South Africa because of the geological environment is now moving to other parts of the world and into other parts of Africa. For instance, Africa's share of exploration expenditure is about $1 billion per year. So South Africa is earning less than 10% of that at the moment. Also, despite the generally favorable geology, the style of mineralization typical of South African precious metal deposits is often not conducive to cheap open cast operations, such as are found in other parts of the world and other parts of Africa. And this is reflected in a smaller share of exploration spend on grassroots or early stage exploration, as shown in yellow. And that hasn't really changed over the years. So you can see a large portion of expenditure going into mine site exploration. That's adding additional reserves to existing mines, or late stage and feasibility study projects where capital is being invested in developing either redeveloping old defunct projects or developing new projects. So South Africa has undoubted geological and mineral endowment, which creates scope for broad geological opportunities for you, as shown here in the general fields of economic geology, fundamental research, and public and private development work. The table moving from left to right shows an idealized mineral development pipeline from exploration through to mine closure. I say it's idealized because it rarely happens that way in practice. And the pipeline may stop and restart or go through various phases of redevelopment, depending on economic circumstances. Not in dispute, however, are the varied contributions made by all of the sub-disciplines listed in one way or another during the different stages of the pipeline. And of course, this may be on land or in the sea, depending on the circumstances. Some sub-disciplines have greater potential than others, but in general, during any career, you should try to get some exposure to an experience of many of these. As mentioned earlier in the presentation, geology is an observational science. And because many observations are not always quantitative, but subjective or interpretive, that has contributed to geology being considered an imprecise science. However, the value of huge numbers of good observations over time is now being realized through the use of powerful computer technology for scenario and other simulations and planning and modeling, showing how valuable geology really is as a science. So geology is data and interpretation driven. Observe, analyze, and think. But even then, models are just models. They might just be real or partly real, or they may appear to be real, but could still be inaccurate. And those models will change and be reinterpreted over time. It's very important to remember that. And key to all of this is the integrity of the data and the data collection process that you and during your career will be involved in, virtually for the entire span of your career, not just in the beginning. And models must be able to withstand our observations, and more observations may lead to change interpretations. So be prepared to change and modify your opinions based on the data. There's no shame in that. That's the way it is in geology. Observations are the tests of our models. Search on the important personality traits of a geologist produced the list on the left-hand side. It seems like a pretty traditional and probably accurate reflection of what most people would expect from geologists. However, in my opinion, it's not the full picture. I added a few of my own on the right-hand side. You need to be determined. It's usually not easy. It's quite difficult when you're out there in the field, you're surrounded by rocks that you don't fully understand and you're trying to work out what's going on. Or you're involved in an exploration program trying to work out where a mineral deposit trend is going and how deep you need to drill to work out where these things are going. And then they don't turn out to be where you expected them. And then you have to try and think again. You need to be skeptical. Nothing in geology is 100% certain, even when you are certain. You need to be reliable to the people you work with and you work for. In making decisions, you need to be more right than wrong, if possible. Integrity is really non-negotiable. Trust, that will develop in time. Trust in yourself, your own opinions, and your interpretations, that will develop, and also trust in others, because you'll need to be a team player. Look at the big picture. You're not the only kid in town. There'll be other people contributing to the work that you are doing, and also the interpretations that you're creating. And if at all possible, develop language skills. As you well know, geology is an international form of work, and you'll need to work in other parts of the world, other parts of the continent in Africa from time to time. So please do what you can to develop some language skills. Developing a career is a lifetime journey in any activity, and not just geology. And you have to take it one day at a time, 1 month at a time, 1 year at a time, and one job at a time. You'll be surprised how quickly the years go. Everything that you do is an extra building block in that career. So take care as to how you put the building blocks together. I'm not limiting these comments to geology. The various presentations that you'll cover during this course will all contribute to your development in one way or another. The entrance tickets are BSc Honours, or a 4-year BTEC degree, and registration with SACNASP. And in your early years, the main focus will be on building technical skills, experience, and knowledge. Over time, these will be supplemented by soft skills that will enable you to get things done and work with and through others. Life is about getting things done and getting them done well, most importantly. And that rarely happens in isolation. So build networks with people and organizations wherever you can. Let them build trust in you, and you build trust in them. You don't have to be expert at everything that you do, or everything in the geological universe, but develop a support network of people better than you in the things that you can't fully do or understand yourself. But be expert in as many as you can handle for yourself. It's not just about today, it's a lifetime endeavor. Perhaps even beyond that, the contributions that you'll make to our profession and to society in general, and how you and those contributions will be viewed later. 5 years in a career is nothing. When I started my career, I was on a 3-year contract. It seemed like a lifetime. And it's 3 years out of 50, 1.5%. So, think about the long term. That's what you're in for in the geological job. So in the future by its nature is difficult and pretty well impossible to predict. But this lists a few thoughts of mine as to how our discipline will develop going forward. I see much greater integration of earth science disciplines. It's inevitable. That's the way that things are. Certainly much greater integration of mineralogy, metallurgy, and chemistry, mineral assay technology, understanding how the minerals can be found, how they are distributed in the weathering environment, and how they can be won from the materials that has got them locked up. So we'll see improvements in metal and mineral species recovery. And then improvement in model development via direct observation. As I said, computer technology is adding tremendously to our tools to be able to do very detailed scenario and scenario planning and create interpretive models. So that will lead to big data management and analysis and integration of software tools. And I would urge all of you to become proficient in utilizing as many different software packages as you can afford and as you can gain access to. And one thing is for sure, the pace of change is going to increase. And then you'll see much more involvement in real-time technology interfaces in the working environment. But you need to stay flexible. The future is always on a few moments ahead of you. And you can change direction and find new pathways at any time. And that's the way that life is. So in closing, let me take this opportunity to wish you well in your future careers in what I find to be the most satisfying multi-dimensional science. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bill. Okay, folks, we've got plenty of time for questions. Either raise your hand if you can find the raise hand button, otherwise just unmute yourself and ask your question. Carol, go ahead. Cassie?
Morning. I have a question for Bill, if you may. Thank you very much for an interesting talk. This is Carrie from Johannesburg. Bill, you've given us some good insights about meeting educational requirements and soft skills simultaneously. And one of the challenges we can sometimes face as younger people is trying to adapt and evolve and have this myriad of skills that will please a potential employer. And what I'm building towards is that sometimes there are preconceived ideas of what will make a good geologist. So when a 6-foot-tall fellow shows up wearing his army pants and boots, it's automatically assumed that he might be a better fit for the job, even without having him open his mouth and answer any questions. Then, you know, if a lady in a neat business suit arrives for the interview, what sort of changes do you see from the potential employer's perspective might be going on or might be coming where employers are also opening their minds to the different types of candidates. And in other words, don't judge a book by its cover. Do you see any transformation?
Hi, Carrie. Good to hear from you, and thanks for the question. It's a good question. I mean, when I was a lad, and that's nearly 50 years ago, starting my career, female geologists were very few and far between. Now the situation has changed completely, and you know, there's a much more even distribution in all areas. Some people may argue, but I know lots of female geologists now. I don't think you know, employers are looking for who's going to give them the best return on their eventual investment in that person. And I think you know, certainly when I've been involved in employing people, first of all, there's the character is important. In any interview, you will, you know, probe to find out something about the person's character. The things I mentioned, like determination, integrity, and you know, the other things I mentioned in the slides, are as important as any technical skill. As I tried to explain in the presentation, you know, geology is data driven. You need certain people who are going to stay the course, commit themselves to collecting good data under difficult circumstances, often at times when, you know, it seems like an absolute waste of time. In the early stages of my career, I spent the first 11 years in direct exploration. First of all, collecting samples myself, you know, soil samples, stream samples, involved in detailed exploration, and then having teams working with me in covering much larger areas. So, you know, you need to understand what needs to be done. There has to be a rationale to what you're doing. And that's when you, at an early stage of your career, need to be thinking about the bigger picture as well. If there's something there, and you can never guarantee that whatever you do is going to enable you to find it, regardless of how difficult the environment appears to be. So you're looking for people who will, you know, be able to stand up to that type of challenge, and then look at the bigger picture. So character is important. Obviously, the skills. You know, how good is their degree, for instance? How did they do? Because that will tell you something about intellectual capacity and perhaps thinking more broadly about what is going on in their particular environment, and then how adaptable they are, because geology is never clear-cut. Again, as I tried to explain there, there's always something new. There's always something different, and observation is not just, you know, taking a few notes. It's looking for you know, what might build up over a long period of time to be something significant or not. Carrie, I'm not sure if I've helped you there.
All good. Thank you very much, Bill. It was a fantastic talk.
Thanks.
Lauren, you have a question. If you'd like to ask your question, please.
Good morning. Thanks, Bill, for the great presentation. With COVID happening, you know, last year, it was a big knock to the industry. We've seen a lot of polls and things like that happening on LinkedIn regarding women leaving, you know, industry and this max exodus of females, not just in geology, but basically all around. I myself also left Do we have sort of a grip on how big a knock was that? Because does that not put us back a few years? Because I mean, now we've had to, with schools closing, decide, do I go on as a geologist, or do I leave and tend to my family first? Because women tend to be, you know, the primary caregivers of the kids. So how do we, as, you know, industry professionals and the mines and all of these things, how do we reverse that coming up? Because I feel like we've basically just gone back to where we were 10 years ago, which means if you want to re-enter the industry, you would have to work 3 times as hard now, because you would be missing out.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question, and you know, really very interesting. I'm not a big LinkedIn follower. Maybe I should be doing this a bit more. And certainly, I do find you know, younger colleagues spend more time at it than I do, probably because of my age and, you know, unfamiliarity with and not willing to spend a lot of time on it. So that's very interesting to me that you say that. Certainly, if you look at the mineral trends in terms of production, the active mines, you know, had a big hiccup in the early part of 2020. So I guess it will be service providers and exploration areas that were probably hit the most by COVID. What sort of job were you in? Was it in the service industry?
Yeah.
Or?
So I was a senior geologist at a coal mine. And you know, we worked throughout the lockdown, so we were privileged enough to stay open. We were supplying Eskom.
Yeah.
So I mean, at one point, you know, you're still working, you're essential, but the schools are closed, and it's a dynamic that I don't think everybody thought of. But I mean, what could we do? It was out of our hands. But then you sit with this choice that you need to make. And I mean, I was privileged enough to be able to consult now, but I mean, I think there's people that cannot do that. So I think just a point to consider for those who are still active, you know, in the mines and exploration, that there is this other factor that a lot of people maybe don't think about.
I think that's a very good point, and I guess it plays into the cyclical nature of the mineral industry. You know, they talk about boom or bust. We're now moving into a new upward cycle, people say, because of rising mineral commodity prices. You know, maybe to some extent because of the weakening of the dollar. I don't know, but you know, those are realities in the mineral industry. And there will be these phases of, you know, up and down, so to speak. Now, for people like yourself, I think it's great that you've been able to get in to use your experience to do some consulting. And, you know, we men, you know, we don't always think about, you know, the impact on our female colleagues because we don't bear babies. We don't have to. Well, we're supposed to look after children. We don't always do it directly ourselves, and we, you know, tend to try to be more continuous in actual jobs than maybe women can or are able to because of the circumstances. So I think that's a very good point that you know, needs to be considered. So I think one needs to, as I said, you know, stay flexible. I think, you know, take my hat off to you that you managed to pick up and do some consulting work. But those are things that, you know, everyone needs to think about. Be flexible, take opportunities if and when they come around. And, you know, one other thing I didn't mention is that in my career, I never turned down a potential job move. If I was asked to do something, I would do it, regardless of. So I didn't actually plot my way through my career. I just, you know, people said to me, "We want you to go here." I went there with my wife and my kids if it was necessary, and yeah, if you're in exploration and you can manage to keep your wife and kids with you, it's a great thing to be able to do. It was a tremendous period in my lifetime. Yeah, so stay flexible, look for opportunities. You know, it is, you know, social media opportunity to get information is easier than it was in my day, in my young time when I was in the field.
Thank you.
Thanks very much for the question. I think it's great, given me a whole new perspective as well.
We have another hand from Rory-san. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
Yes, morning.
Just before you ask your question, to everybody on the call, if you're not a presenter, please do not share your screen. It causes total havoc with the organization. Okay, Rory, please go ahead.
Yes, I'd like to know, with the infancy of my career, I've been having quite a few chats with expertise in our field, in our field, and I've realized that all of them, they discourage exploration, not to say that it's bad or anything, but based on the trends that it behaves and all that. I'd like to know, what is the best way to diverse my career as a geologist and best make myself marketable?
Okay, so I couldn't hear you very well in the early part of your question. Can you repeat that bit a bit again for me? I didn't pick up, you know, the start, the early part of your commentary.
Oh, pardon me. Oh yes, can you hear me? I think it's unmuted. Yes. What I was asking is that, what is the best approach in diversifying our careers as geologists and making it more marketable? I heard you mention soft skills and all personal traits and all that. I'd like to know, how do we best integrate other disciplines into geology to actually expand what geology is today to actually be part of the global generation or IR?
Okay, you know, to some extent it comes from opportunity. It's going to be chicken and egg, isn't it? You know, if you are in a working environment, if you're at a mine, say you're a mine geologist, underground, open pit, it doesn't matter. Try and find out, you know, integrate as much as you can with the other disciplines, with the miners, particularly the metallurgists, the guys who are recovering the minerals. You learn a lot about, if you can learn a bit about mineral processing while you're at a mine, that's very useful. I learned about mineral processing when I was in exploration through discovery. So you become, if you're lucky enough to be involved in a mineral discovery, you move on to the next stage of evaluating that from an economic perspective. Then other people will come in and, you know, depending on what type of product, mineral you're dealing with, if it's gold or platinum or other types of minerals, you'll tend not to set up an assay plant on the site, so you'll be a bit separated from it, but find out as much as possible about how the mineral is assayed, how it's going to be recovered, what sort of processes will take place in terms of in any eventual mining process. Try and find out as much as possible about the total pipeline as it affects you. As I said, I did it when I was in exploration. You can do it at the opposite end if you're on a mine. And there is opportunity when you're on a mine, because you can actually visit the processing plant and get a bit more information about from the people actually involved in that aspect of the work. And you'll find over the longer term in your career, that background knowledge will be tremendously valuable in preparing you for working at a higher level within any environment. It's about understanding the total process, not just about the little part that you're playing in it. I hope that will help answer your question. And then by integrating with other disciplines, you're starting to, you'll develop those soft skills, but questioning information, getting information, developing relationships, and they will remember you if they move somewhere else. And if they're impressed by what you have done, they will remember you and maybe pick you up and drag you into another job somewhere else. That happens. That happens a lot. Does
I
that?
just want to interject there, Bill, directly after you've been saying that. Before we go to Sunday, who's got a question, Rory-san, that is the point is the Gsa Skills program that we are doing. We're trying to give people an idea of what happens outside of pure geology, because you'll see a little bit later on day 3, we actually talk about minerals processing, metallurgy, a little bit about survey, mining, all of these other issues that are important for you as a geologist just to know something about, because that can help your career. It's not going to turn you into a metallurgist or a mining engineer, heaven forbid, but it will give you an insight into what it is that they do and how it affects what you do. And okay, Sunday, you've got a question. Please, if you would unmute yourself and ask.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, Bill, for the good presentation. We've seen now that the global spend on South African exploration has gone below 1%. And now you mentioned some of the reasons include security of tenure, investors' risks, and the depth of the geology. But what then do you think we could do in order to resuscitate and give hope to the South African exploration and mining?
Yeah, that's a good question with no easy answer. There's a lot of discussion going on that subject at the moment between industry and the government. You know, I have my opinions. My opinions are that are basically very simply that the current legislation doesn't really encourage or enable exploration to take place in South Africa. It's just become more difficult than it needs to be, or it should be. And you know, that's preventing pure grassroots exploration from chasing some of the other more exotic minerals that might or might not exist in the country. You know, the gold deposits, manganese deposits, coal deposits, iron ore deposits, platinum deposits in South Africa, the geology of those are fairly well established, apart from you know, what you might argue to be greenstone type hosted vein deposits of gold and other things like that. But the general geological makeup of South Africa makes exploration for the minerals I mentioned very predictable. My experience is mainly in diamonds, which is a fairly unpredictable mineral as far as exploration is concerned. So I think, you know, that one of the things is as you saw in that slide that I presented, the bulk of exploration in South Africa goes into mine site and near mine evaluation and feasibility studies. Only a small portion goes into grassroots, and it's about, you know, how much total spend there is and the percentage that goes into grassroots. If changing the legislation or creating a better enabling environment will make a difference. There are other factors in South Africa as well, you know, social and lots of other issues as well. So there's no easy answer for it. But in the meantime, while there is limited exploration in South Africa, there's a lot of opportunity in adjacent countries and in other parts of the continent as well. And I know that's going to be difficult for South Africans to break into that because of the because of the difficulty of getting into those other countries and taking jobs that might be regarded as being for other people. So the best thing to do is get mine experience and use that experience to try and build your career here in South Africa as far as possible.
Do we have any other questions? Alfred, will you please stop fiddling with the screen share? Thank you. Are there any further questions for Bill? Going once, going twice. Thank you very much, Bill, for a very interesting presentation as usual. Oh, it looks like Eric has one last question before we go. Okay, Eric, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Okay, thank you, Bill, for the questions that you've answered. My question is simple. You as a geoscientist, what are the limitations that you have encountered so far throughout your career?
Yeah, the questions are easy. The answers aren't always as simple. I've lived through a number of mineral cycles. I've been in the industry for 47 years. So I barely started working 3-4 years into my career when the diamond market went into a huge slump. Very little exploration money available. I was working for De Beers then, and if you look back in the history books, they'll tell you that De Beers nearly went bankrupt in 1980-81. So that was an interesting time. So these cycles create difficulty, but if you can survive a cycle, if you can survive one cycle, as you move on, then you build up not an immunity to it, but you understand it better. It's just a question of pulling in your horns for a little time, trying to stay in employment if you can. As I said, take any job that's available to stay in the industry and do what you need to do to survive. As we heard earlier, it's not always possible for some people and you need to dip out, but then stay flexible, stay opportunistic. I think the mineral cycles have been the biggest more than anything else. Working with difficult people sometimes, it doesn't help to be difficult back, especially if they're your superior. You just have to work your way through it without, giving up your integrity or your, sort of fundamental characteristics. You just stay true to the direction that you think needs to be taken. People are the most difficult, whether you're working for them, sometimes with them. You have to have ways of dealing with those situations. It gets easier as you go on. Obviously, as you become more senior in an organization, people will listen to you and do what you suggest. I don't like to tell people to do things. I suggest to them that this is in everyone's best interest. And I think you also have to recognize that, just because you might be perceived as the boss, you don't have any divine right to be right. I've quite often come across in my career situations where, people working for me or with me have, shown me the error of my ways. I think it's important to be honest about that and accept it and be prepared to accept opinions from other people and examine them carefully. In geology, there is no perfect answer. It's a question of getting the answer that is going to be most right for those particular circumstances. So, I think humility is important, and it comes back to, working with people, dealing with people. I've dealt with lots of difficult farmers in the previous mineral legislation dispensation, and you work out ways and means of strategizing around them when they don't want them to work on your property. And sometimes there is no choice. You can get things sorted out. And at the end of the day, after, it was difficult for me in the beginning, being Scottish, people couldn't understand me. I couldn't understand them. And half the time they were speaking Afrikaans. So you find a way of working around it. You learn to speak Afrikaans, or enough to be able to survive. And wherever you are, that's what you have to be. You just have to be flexible to deal with those difficulties. But people you work with, people you're working for, people you meet, pick your disagreements, but stay true to the line that you want to move in on, and don't give up.
Thank you. Any last questions? Okay, Bill, thanks again very much.
Thanks. I'll try and give more slides next time.
It was actually wonderful.
Although I think, to be honest, thanks to everyone for the questions. You're never too old to learn something new. And I learned a few new things today. I think, it's been as valuable for me as I hope the presentation and discussion has been for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Okay, we'll then move on to the next presentation, which just so happens to be me. Can I confirm that you can see my presentation screen? Nolene, Sarah? Nolene, just confirm that you can see my presentation screen, please.
Hi, Tanya. We can see your screen, but it's in sort of the share screen, so we can see your notes as well.
There.
Yeah, perfect. That's great.
Okay, wonderful. So our discussion topic today is, what does it mean to be a geoscience professional? There's so much talk about professionalism, being a professional, but what does it actually mean to be a professional geoscientist? In geoscience and engineering, and in pretty much any other vocation, professionalism is defined in terms of three pillars: registration, continuing professional development, and then our professional conduct and behaviors. And we'll take a look at each of these pillars and have a look and see how it affects us as geoscientists. So let's start off with registration. A question people often ask is, well, why do we need to be registered? Why would we even want to be registered? Well, primarily what registration does is it provides a certain level of recognition for what you have done and what you know, your knowledge, your experience. It's a formal recognition that is not only local, but is also international. It tells the people you work with, your employers, your clients, and even the general public, that you have the required amount of experience, you have the minimum academic qualifications. It doesn't say how well you can do the job. It just says that you are qualified to do it. It gives people the confidence to hire you, knowing that you are what you say you are. Because in today's world of fake degrees, of fake news, of fake this and fake that, if you can demonstrate that you actually have a degree, that you have your qualification, that you have a certain amount of experience, people are more likely to be comfortable hiring you. And in addition, if ever you are going to want to sign off as a competent person on a public document for a stock exchange or for an investor, you need to be registered. And we'll go into that a little bit later in a different presentation. I want to highlight the fact that simply because you are registered doesn't necessarily mean that you're competent or that you're going to do the job well. Being registered simply says that you have the necessary knowledge and the skills to do the job. We'll talk about competence a little bit later on. Professional registration can take two parts: statutory, which is obligatory, and the voluntary registration. Now, in South Africa, as a practicing geoscientist, you must be registered with SACNASP, the South African Council for Natural Scientific Professions. This is not discretionary. It is by an act of parliament that you must be registered with SACNASP if you are going to practice as a geoscientist. Sarah's going to talk a little bit about SACNASP registration in the next presentation, so I'm not going to say anything more on this subject. I'm going to focus more on the professional registration or professional membership with the GSSA, and this is a voluntary registration or a voluntary membership. As we said earlier, SACNASP is the statutory registering body. The GSSA is the primary voluntary association, and we represent geoscientists, earth scientists, and geohydrologists on the SACNASP Council. The GSSA is both a learned and a scientific society, as well as a professional body. So what does that mean? Well, as a learned or scientific society, we provide opportunities for free and paid conferencing, both face-to-face at some stage, we hope, as well as online. We provide opportunities for you to publish in an internationally acceptable peer-reviewed journal. But as a professional society, we offer you workshops and skills training in areas required for professional development. We also provide a web-based CPD portal, a professional code of ethics, networking opportunities, as well as representation on a number of local, regional, and international bodies. The GSSA operates under 8 different portfolios, which are presented here. Now, these portfolios don't operate in silos. There's a lot of overlap in many activities, and it requires input from a number of different organizations. We also have a couple of independent committees, and we have representation on various external organizations that provide some backup or input to the geological activities that we have. I've spoken about statutory and professional membership of bodies in South Africa. If we go to organizations outside of South Africa, here are just a few organizations that I've been able to pick up that are in Africa, which are also statutory or professional bodies, as well as some outside of Africa altogether, such as the Oz IMM, Geosciences Canada, the EFG. Within Africa, there are a number of these. These are not the only ones, but these are just some of those that I picked up immediately. The question you need to ask yourself when looking at an organization, if it is going to be a statutory or professional body, does it have an education requirement? Does it have an obligatory code of ethics or a code of professional conduct? Is there an operating complaints and disciplinary committee? And is there a requirement for ongoing CPD? And if this organization has all of those 4 requirements, then it is a statutory or a professional body to which registration or membership would be beneficial for you. Okay, so the second pillar that we're going to look at is continuing professional development. And so why is this important? Well, when you registered, someone checked that you have the qualifications and the experience necessary. This now may well have been 5 or 10 years ago. But have you kept up with what's happening in your field? Or do you still only know how to use a scale rule and haven't upgraded to a GPS, for example? Can everybody please mute their mics? There's quite a bit of feedback coming through. So this is what CPD does. It keeps us relevant because knowledge is a static thing. And if we don't keep up with advances in our field, we're going to fall behind. If you have a look at this quotation here, it says that the knowledge, half-life of knowledge is 8 years. Well, whether it be 8 years or 80 years or even 2 years, after a certain period of time, you forget things. Information moves on, knowledge changes. So we need to keep up with what's happening in our chosen field, or we are going to become irrelevant. So what is CPD? Well, it's effectively a term that we use to describe what it is that we do, things that we learn. It's something that takes place throughout your working life. It's really a logbook of what you experience. It's how you track and document the skills, the knowledge and the experience that you gain after you leave university. It includes both formal and informal studies. It's an ongoing program of personal development, and it's there to keep you up to date with the latest advancements in your field of practice. And these can be technical, they can be academic, they can be procedural. Everything new that's happening in your field of practice, you want to keep up to date with. Now, CPD is so important that you're going to find it in all of the ethics and geoethics statements that are out there. You'll also see it as part of pretty much all your codes of professional conduct. With respect to the GSA, demonstrating CPD is not currently a requirement of GSSA membership. But in terms of the Code of Ethics, it is a moral and professional obligation. And so it is highly recommended that you do CPD in order to promote your own personal professional advancement. And this doesn't make any difference where you're employed, whether it be in academia, whether you're employed in industry, research, even governmental or statutory institutions. With respect to SACNAS, CPD is a requirement for registration. It's a requirement for the renewal of registration. And this is both for professionals and also from April of this year, it has been a requirement for candidates also to have some sort of CPD. And Sarah will talk to us more about that. Now, you don't have to do both. It's going to be an absolute mission if you're going to have to do CPD at both GSSA and through SACNAS, and it's going to be confusing and expensive and just a plain pain in the proverbial. However, what the GSSA has done is it has signed an MOU with SACNAS in order to make compliance easier. So the MOU states that you as a GSSA member who is also registered with SACNAS, you can do your CPD through either institution and be mutually recognized by the other. It's not that one is better or worse or right or wrong. They're both equally acceptable to GSSA and to SACNAS. You decide for yourself which one is going to suit your specific circumstances better. It's not up to the company that you work for. It's not up to the place where you are registered. The choice is yours to decide for yourself where you are going to do your CPD. Just one important thing to note, that each system is a standalone structure. You can't combine the two. So you can't do a bit of GSSA and a bit of SACNAS. You've got to do one or the other. But that choice is yours. Some of the benefits of the GSSA system is that it is geoscience specific. It looks at the needs of geoscientists. It specifically looks at issues around whether you're unemployed, retrenched, consulting, retired, or field-based as well. And it doesn't matter where you live or work. If you're registered with the GSSA, you can do your CPD. It doesn't only rely on GSSA content. Again, we have this MOU in place with SACNAS, but we also have MOUs with other local, regional, or international geoscience organizations. And just a word on here is that we are a founder member of the Global Geoscience Professionalism Group, which is an initiative to promote global geoscience professionalism, and also which will provide benchmarks in the standards of CPD systems internationally. So one of the objectives of this organization is that international MOUs can be written so that in time, if you're compliant with one or other member of the GGPG, that means you're compliant with the GSSA, which in turn means you're compliant with SACNAS. Same thing with the SAIMM, Southern African Institute of Mining and Metallurgy. Many geoscientists are registered with the SAIMM as well. They're currently building their CPD system, but we will have an agreement with them in place so that if you are a member of both the GSSA and the SAIMM, you're only going to need to do it in one place. Here is a summary slide that looks at the different categories of the GSSA CPD program. Although there are 4 different categories, our members are encouraged to collect points across the spectrum, but they're not obligated to do so. And here are some examples of the types of things that fall under the different categories in the GSSA CPD system. We've got the formal learning, which is obviously what we're doing in a formally structured course field trip. We look at knowledge contribution, where you prepare and present courses, lectures. There's the stuff that you do informally by yourself. Personal research, reading of articles, informal, non-structured lectures and field trips. And then there's the things that you do in terms of professional practice. Not going to go into much detail with any of these, but just as a commercial punt, if you want some more information on these details, you should join one of the online CPD webinars that we hold every year in March. You can also catch the on-demand option on the GSSA YouTube channel. One of the things that the GSSA CPD program does is it takes cognizance of people who are unemployed. And here you can see a bunch of things that you can do if you're unemployed, and you can still qualify for your CPD credits. We have lots of free online webinars, courses, lunchtime lectures, and so forth. Volunteering at mentoring programs. Sitting on one of these SAM codes committees or working groups. Help to organize or otherwise participate in some of the GSSA activities in terms of the branches or divisions. Assist with contributions to GeoBulletin, the GSSA website, various other social media outlets. Perhaps write a paper for the SAJG or any other article for that matter. If you're a student, PhD, MSc student, you can write a paper based on your thesis, publish it. Present the results at a lunchtime lecture or at a formal GSSA event. Sign up as a mentor. There are also some examples here of the types of things that you as a geologist might do if you are based in the field or remote area and you can't easily access CPD activities. But this is so much easier now that a lot of the presentations are online, but still we know, depending upon connectivity and where you are in the world, you might not always be able to attend these. But there are so many other things that you can do in order to obtain your CPD. So how do you physically do it? Well, you need to log into the GSSA website and go to the members access area. It's important to update your personal information. We need to know both your GSSA and SACNASP ID numbers so that we can link where CPD is being done. You must also let us know whether you're going to be doing it through the GSSA or through SACNASP. Then you need to input your activities. So you go to the My CPD Points tab and you would add there the things that you were doing. And then once a year on about the 31st of March. You download the standardized report, and then you go to the SACNAS website, you log onto your portfolio there, and you upload the GSSA certificate. And that makes you then compliant with SACNAS as well as with the GSSA. So in summary, looking at CPD, it's a self-directed process. It looks at your personal development, and it is your responsibility. Neither your company nor any one of the professional bodies is going to be responsible for your CPD activities. You decide what you want to do. You need to log it. You need to keep track of it and submit your CPD credits. If you're working for a company, it is not their responsibility to provide or pay for your CPD activities. They may, but typically those days are gone where they can afford to do this wholesale. But they can provide training opportunities and other types of supports. There is also a mining charter obligation to invest in human resource development. So discuss your CPD program with your company as part of your personal career progression plan. Okay, the final pillar that we are going to discuss today is that of professional conduct and ethics, which are based on a code of ethics and backed up by a complaints procedure. This is the GSSA Code of Ethics. Now, simply being registered with the GSSA means that you agree to abide by this code and are subject to them. Each clause in this code has a detailed discussion about specific issues covered in the clause. And I recommend that you download the code from the GSSA website and go through them in detail, because they are going to affect you directly. Guaranteed, you are going to encounter situations in your working life where you are going to need to know what these clauses of the code are. And this is not only for the GSSA, whichever professional or statutory body you belong to, they will have a code of ethics or a code of professional conduct. And yes, there are going to be minor differences, but typically the requirements of one code of ethics are fairly similar across the board. So whichever organization you belong to, make sure that you know what is required of you in terms of the code of ethics. Because, as I said before, you are going to run across times where you're going to need to know how to apply them. Now, codes of ethics and conduct are generally backed up by a complaints and disciplinary procedure. Now, the purpose of this complaints procedure is not to beat you with a big stick. It's there to guide and improve behaviors. There's a formal complaints process. However, before it gets to that stage, it's recommended that anyone who has a complaint look at it seriously and see if it's something that can't be dealt with informally. And if you find that it's just a case of professional or academic difference of opinion, let it go. Don't make it into more than it is. The complaints procedure is there for serious breaches of conduct. It's not just a whinge. Professional conduct and behaviors also include the following issues here: how we deal with outside influences, insider trading, research integrity, plagiarism, copyright infringements, harassment and discrimination issues, mentoring, geovandalism, dress codes, and time management. Which means what? How we deal with undue influence. How do we react when our superiors or our clients want us to write a report in a certain way? Or how are we going to balance the need to work with the ability to actually do the job? One of the most difficult decisions you're ever going to have to make is whether to accept a job that you need, but you know in your heart that you are not really qualified for. Insider trading is another area where you as a geoscientist will need to be careful. At some stage in your career, you are going to be privy to sensitive information. Do you use that information to buy certain stocks, or tell your friends and relatives which stocks to buy and sell based on that confidential information? Not only will that land you in jail, but it is also ethically not acceptable. With respect to professional integrity, I just want to highlight 3 issues, such as intellectual honesty. How do you go about peer review? How fair are you in looking at other people's work? What is their contribution to your research proposal or technical reports? Plagiarism. This is something that's highlighted particularly in the academic world, but it can apply just as much to the applied situation. Cut and paste from the internet is a big one because it's so easy to pick up an image from the internet. But do we attribute it to where we got it from? And then copyright infringement. And the difference between copyright and plagiarism: in plagiarism, we use people's work without proper attribution, whereas copyright infringement, we use someone else's work without obtaining their permission. All things we need to be careful of, both in the academic and in the applied environment. Discrimination and harassment. These are 2 sides of the same coin, and quite frankly, neither is acceptable. There are many ways that people experience discrimination and harassment in the workplace. And that, unfortunately, is still more common than we would like to believe. And just one point that I'm going to highlight in this presentation is the practice of cyberbullying. Fortunately, this practice is not restricted to adolescents. And as the digital sphere expands and social media dominates our lives, cyberbullying has the potential to grow exponentially among our broader geoscience community. We need to be aware that issues of discrimination are legally regulated in South Africa and in many countries worldwide. So if you do experience discrimination, there are appropriate places to lay complaints. But at the same time, you need to keep in mind that sometimes the reason you are not being appointed to a particular position may not be due to discrimination. It might simply be because the other person is just better qualified for that particular job. Mentoring. Many of our members engage in mentoring, coaching, and also tutoring. And we're very grateful that they do so. In some of the larger companies or universities, there are sometimes formal structures for mentoring, but more often than not, It's not going to be easy to get into one of these programs, particularly if you happen to be in a junior company or a consultancy. But there are a number of programs out there, such as the one that SACNASP has, SAIMM, Bridge the Gap also has formal programs. And the GSSA is in the process of growing a formal mentoring program. In any program, we've always got far more mentee applications than we have mentors. So that is why I would like to highlight the fact that please make yourself available for mentorship, initially as a mentee, then take the time to build your career, gain experience. But don't forget to come back and volunteer as a mentor to help the next generation. Dress codes. What does that have to do with professionalism? Well, if you have a look at this picture here, you see the same guy in a bunch of different dresses. How does how you dress say anything about your competence? The short answer to that is no. How you dress says nothing about how competent you are. But does how you dress say anything about your professionalism? Well, that's a different story altogether. Because if you pitch up in your shorts and t-shirt to a formal occasion, people are going to be concerned about the kind of professional you are. But at the same time, if you pitch up in a suit out in the field or at a drilling rig, they're really going to wonder about not only your professionalism, but about your mental stability as well. How we manage our time also says a lot about how we are perceived. Here are some issues to pay attention to. Are you on time? Or are you that guy who is always late for everything, who no matter what time the meeting is, always comes 10 minutes late? Do you pay attention? Are you present? Or do you spend all your time on your phone or doing something else while the meeting is in progress? Multitasking is one thing, but being preoccupied and inattentive is entirely another matter. Are you productive? Being productive is more than just how much work we get done in a given period of time. It's also about using less to create more, to work smarter, not just harder. Finally, under the new normal, how do we manage our time, productivity, and efficiency while working from home? As many of us still are under the lockdown regulations. Remember, we're still working, even if it is from home. COVID is not an excuse for a sloppy work ethic. I'm sure that many of you will have seen this experiment. You take a large glass jar and you fill it with sand, rocks, water, and pebbles. How much you can get into the jar as a corollary for how much we can accomplish with our limited time. Obviously, if on the left-hand side you put in the sand first, you're not going to get all the big rocks in, whereas the jar on the right-hand side has everything in it. So to get the best out of a limited amount of time, we need to get our priorities right. We want to schedule the important tasks first. These are represented by the rocks, the big things in our lives, our goals, our objectives. Secondly, the pebbles, the important and urgent tasks, like finishing the assignment that has been sitting on your desk for a week, or getting your technical report submitted by the due date. Sometimes this also includes taking care of our emotional, spiritual well-being, including taking care of certain extended family obligations. Next, the sand. These are the myriads of things that we've got in our lives, which in the greater scheme of things are probably urgent, but definitely not that important. Finally, the water. These are the unimportant, non-urgent, trivial time wasters that should only be done once all these other things have been completed. Here we're talking about things like checking our social media, having a drink with our buddies, hanging out at the mall. Yes, all the things that we would much rather be doing than being at work or at school. These are the fun things in life. Yes, there very definitely is a place for these things, but that place is not first place. We mentioned earlier that the simple act of registration does not make a person competent. Just a note on semantics. Competencies are the skills that you need in order to do a particular job, and competence is your ability to be able to apply those skills. So competence is comprised of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. That's often compared to an iceberg, where our knowledge and skills, this is the bit that's seen by others, only makes up a small proportion. By far the larger proportion of our competence iceberg is down to our attitudes, our values, our personal standards, beliefs, and motives. And these typically go unnoticed, except when they let us down. So if we have a look at knowledge, this quote here by Eric Hoffer once again highlights the importance of CPD, how we need to stay abreast of new developments in our field, or we are going to be left behind. I want to highlight the outcome of this academic study some years ago, where it noted that 85% of job success comes from having well-developed soft skills and people skills, and only 15% is from our technical skills. So what it's telling us is take the time and the effort to develop soft skills, to develop people skills, which is often difficult for geoscientists because as scientists, as engineers, we tend to be hardwired for practical things. Knowledge and skills competence goes hand in hand with proficiency, which is how well we do the things that we do. There's a continuum from being a novice to being an expert. There's a time element that's involved in becoming proficient. By and large, the more you do something, the better you should be at doing that. Having said, simply because a person has been doing something for 20 years does not necessarily mean that they are proficient at doing it. Now, this time element is not going to be the same for everyone. Some people are going to become proficient at skills in a very short time. Others are going to take a bit longer. Or one particular person, you can become proficient at one task in a very short space of time, but another task is going to take you a lot longer to get there. Here are some of the attitudes that promote competence. You'll note that nothing here is geoscience specific. These are attitudes that can and need to be applied in all aspects of life. And that will make you a better, more professional individual, whatever your chosen field of practice is. So to summarize then, professionalism in the geosciences is based on our professional registration or membership, our continuing professional development, which is something we do throughout our life, and finally, by looking at the norms and behaviors of our professional conduct based on a code of ethics backed by a complaints and disciplinary procedures. And with that, I thank you for your attention. Okay, do we have any questions so far? Gary?
Yes, thank you very much, Nolene. If there are no other questions, I wouldn't mind squeezing mine in.
Sure,
that was a very thorough presentation. Thank you very much. I was wondering, because when we think of professionalism, we normally apply it to an individual type of behavior, where you've rightly explained to us how to contextualize that in the professional setting. And like you said, there are different levels. If one reads the code of conduct, it mentions mentoring or guidance. It mentions a penalty that's not a suspension and things like that. So without using a stick to beat somebody who did something wrong, could you give us an example of the most common complaint that you receive for professional aspects, let's just say over the last 5 years, 2 years, whichever? And could you give us some insight into what the most severe misconduct was during the time under your leadership?
Right, let me start with the last one first. The most severe contraction of the Code of Ethics was a gentleman who murdered his wife. Now, you'd think that being held up in front of the Gsa Code of Ethics would be the least of his problems at that stage. But that is one of the things that the Code of Ethics said, that you need to obey the laws of the land. And so he was expelled from the GSSA for that. But if we look at some of the other issues, plagiarism is one of the most common ones that we find. I said, both in terms of academic and also professional documents. We have non-compliance with the SAN code's reporting requirements. We have people who profess to have certain knowledge or experience or abilities that they don't actually have. So those are some of the more common ones. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. Okay, Khotatso?
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic and very informative presentation, Tanya. So thank you for that. I've just got two very different questions, but they're still quite short, so I'll keep it succinct. The first one is, if you let your membership lapse but you have been doing some CPD and you want to re-register and get on the membership again for both the GSSA and SACNASP, but you have been doing some of these courses and taking some of the formal work, will you get credited or back credited for those courses? So that's my question once you re-register. And then my second question is, if we want to submit to the Geo Bulletin and contribute maybe some writings, what is the best way to do that? Thank you very much.
Okay, first question, the short answer is yes, you will be credited for anything that you have done historically. Second question, send your contribution to info@gssa.org and it'll find its way to whoever from there.
Thank you very much.
There's a question from Arifa, who's having difficulties with his mic. For student application, don't stress too much about references. Just send your applications directly to info@gssa.org.za, and we will do our best to sort it out through there. Okay. Eric, yes, you have another question, please.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. I have two questions for you. Often at times we require to register with GSSA or SACNASP. I'm simply asking, what is the motivation for the younger generation for registering with GSSA or SACNASP? And the other question is, I wanted you to touch on how to register with the GSSA, specifically for somebody who has just graduated.
Okay, the last question is the most direct one. You go to the website, you go to members, and you click on join the GSSA, and that walks you through exactly what you need to do and to become a member. The reason why you want to become a member of any professional or statutory body is because with so many issues out there, companies, organizations are looking for individuals that they know that they've got a qualification, that they have got the experience that they say they have. Companies want that registration. They want to see that you are who you say you are. Also, it tells the rest of the world that you've got the minimum qualifications, that you've done this, you've been there. And if you want to write any technical documentation for a stock exchange or for an investor, you're going to require that registration because it's a necessity if you're going to be able to sign off on one of those documents. You okay with that? Okay, do we have any other questions? Let me see if there's anything else in a... Okay, and in our next presentation, Sarah's going to talk more about reasons for registration. Sizwe, yes, you have a question?
Good morning, Tanya. How are you?
Good,
Thank you for a very great presentation. I had you dwell much on the code of ethics. Just for young professionals that have just entered the industry, usually they're taken through internships. And obviously, we know after the internship, we all anticipating for an appointment. So for those very young professionals that maybe go through the internship and maybe do get selected to be one of the few individuals that get to join the team, what does the code of ethics say, or rather stipulate to supervisors that don't initially, or rather don't appoint those selected young professionals? Does the GSA Code of Ethics maybe touch on such a scenario?
The Code of Ethics is pretty much like a constitution. It gives you the principles and guidelines. It is not a code of practice that says this is how you have to act under every specific situation. Those sorts of codes of practice are left to individual companies to decide the details for that company. As I said, the Code of Ethics is far more generalized, but it gives you the basics of how you ought to think when you are going to do a particular action. So unfortunately, in answer to your question, no, we don't go into that sort of detail, though that is left for a code of practice. Alfred, will you please not fiddle with the screen share?
Tanya, if I could suggest that we make our speakers co-hosts, and then I'll change the share screening options.
Yes, please, let's do that. Okay, so now we move on to Sarah van Aert. Welcome, Sarah. Sarah is with SACNASP, and she's going to talk to us about the statutory registration.
Morning, everyone. I'm just going to start sharing my screen. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tanya. I will quickly. Okay. It's disabled.
Okay, I think you need to make. Tanya, can you make her a host, please?
Okay. Okay, Sarah, you should be able to know.
Right.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
We're there. Thank you very much. I think, and I always come in and listen to Tanya before mine, and I think there are a lot of parallels with your voluntary association and your professional body. And there was a question at the end about the two organisations, and I think they serve sometimes the same goals and sometimes slightly different ones. And the main thing about your professional body is that it is the legal requirement that you must belong to either SACNASP, or if you're a doctor or a nurse, the Health Professions Council, or an engineer, the Engineering Council. So we are the sort of statutory body that that you need to belong to, and it's important that you do understand that difference. SACNASP has changed a lot. I joined in 2013, and we've made a lot of progress in sort of, you know, how we engage with our students and our candidates, and I'll go into a little bit into that as I go through this presentation. So you can see here just the overview of SACNASP, which is the vision and our mission and our values. And I think it's just important that the mission in particular is to provide an efficient statutory council for the recruitment, registration, regulation, and advancement of the natural scientific professions to ensure high quality services, the economic growth and societal benefit. SACNASP reports through into the Department of Science Innovation, and we have a very strong relationship with them. And it's important that you understand that we, with your help, can guide government on decisions that are made in the field of natural science. We have just finished, I think 2 years ago, we sent a report on the general state of natural science in South Africa through to them. And then we're just finishing now with a report on the unemployed, underemployed, and employed natural scientists in South Africa. And we actually got input from our natural scientists into that document as we asked them to complete a survey for which they got 1 CPD point. So you can see where we slightly differ from your voluntary association. So I'm going to start with, most of you will join us as a candidate scientist. So there's a series of competencies that are required in order that you can progress to be a professional natural scientist. Now, the technical competencies in your field, they are really where your voluntary association is your go-to. So they will know what training you need. They will guide you through that stage. The other ones, which is your business management, your ethical training, your written verbal skills, technology and IT, and your emotional intelligence and soft skills, we will guide you through as well. We can do this, and I know that your next presenter talks about CVs and cracking that interview. We all want to try and help you gain these little bits of your toolbox. So what we look at is, what skills do you have? What skills do you need? And how can you get the help? So the whole idea is to complete your toolbox with all of those attributes so that then you go on to be a fully rounded natural scientist in your relevant field. Because if you look at this little chart, most people leave university around 23 and then retire at 65. So you can't do nothing between the ages of 23 and 65 and still be relevant to your industry. So this is where CMP, which is the Candidate Mentor Program, and then CPD, your Continuing Professional Development Training, comes in. And we like to look at these as your lifelong learning opportunities. So how do you get to be a registered scientist? There are 3 elements, and each phase has a support structure. Your student enrollment. Now, this is really where you're not registered with us, but you're given guidance by us as a student as to how to register, what the benefits of registering are. We have networking events and also skills training. Post-graduation registration is your candidate. And so we have 2 programs, which is the Candidate Mentor Program, which, as Tanya said, is we run through our VAs. But for those people who don't really have a VA or didn't get onto the training program run by their own VA, we do have a candidate training program. And in fact, we had the first of our webinars related to that just at the end of March, which was on business practice. And then you have your professional registration. So once you've completed your candidate phase, you go into your professional registration, and that's when you start really concentrating on your continuing professional development. What we are seeing is that a lot of candidates, although it's not mandatory at the moment to do some of the continuing professional development, we are seeing a lot of candidates are doing some of the courses, and what our registration committee is looking for actually is to see that candidates have had some evidence of some form of continuing professional development. So part of it, they must include in their portfolio when they upgrade that they have done something from our CPD program. So the student enrollment, any student in their final year can enroll with SACNASP. It gives you access to our networks, guidance on the benefits of the professional body registration. All our registration is now online. This has been since 2017. So in order to apply, you need to go online. And again, very similar to the GSSA one, it takes you through all of the processes that you need, and then you pay online, and it's through PayFast. And when you come to renew every year, again, you just go on, you pay. And one of the real advantages of this now is that you can print your certificate quickly without actually having to wait for us to send you a copy. We do some training, including ready to work and soft skills. And one of the outcomes of COVID was that we had to quite quickly navigate the system where people were not going anywhere anymore. So we have set up a CPD, an online CPD, where there are many courses that are free that people can get their category 1 and 3 points for. And there's also student-focused events that are run by SACNAS, but they are again also online. So the candidate registration. That means you've had no formal work following graduation. The annual fee is approximately, application fee is approximately 500 Rand, and it applies for the year and that year of registration. So if you apply in April, you'll get your full year's registration. So it's often advisable to apply early in the financial year. That's just a sort of budgeting advice. It takes approximately 3 months, and you don't need a referee. Those only kick in once you upgrade. So you can qualify with a diploma, your undergrad degree, honours or higher. The level of your degree will reduce the work experience that is required for professional registration. As I said earlier, all applications are only accepted via the portal and on our website. And we've done a lot of work on that website. We also have a very active Facebook page. But if you go to our FAQs on the website, they are quite comprehensive. But we do also get a lot of questions through our question page on Facebook. But I think your first port of call, if you've got a question, is actually to go to the website. So the candidate phase is really about mentoring, making sure you get the correct training, making sure you're going in the right direction, giving you advice, coaching, support. And this is very much a sort of dual role between us and the voluntary association. And you're very lucky with the GSSA. They are very supportive. They've given us a lot of support with our CPD online. And they also taken up our request for our candidate mentor program for the second time, I think. So professional registration. So you've got your candidate, so now you can branch out. It depends on your degree. So if you have your honours or above, you would be registering as a professional natural scientist. If you've got no honours or a diploma, a 3-year diploma, it would be certificated natural scientist. So if you're already a candidate, you just upgrade via the portal with your existing registration number, and you will just then need to add, that is when the referees come in. It's very important when we talk about referees that your referee knows you, that your referee is able to give you a good reference on your science work experience. We often get referee report, not often, but we sometimes get referee reports and the guy says, I actually don't know this person. I met him once. So you just need to think very carefully about your referee. And often people say that our lead times are very lengthy. The biggest problem we have, which really makes the time to registration longer, is difficulty in getting referee reports. So they just need to know that you have nominated them. And it's sort of the candidate's responsibility to badger them a bit. Just go and say, did you get your thing from SACNAS? Have you sent it back? Because that's what really does delay your registration. But if you're a new applicant and you're not a candidate, but you've got your 3 years experience, you also just apply for the relevant candidate again through the portal. When we talk about continuing professional development, it's vital, as I said earlier, that people keep on top of the relevant developments in their field. So a competent professional must have the appropriate training at the right level. And again, that now comes, you're now employed, so that a lot of that will now come from your employer, and it will come through your VA, and some of it will come from your professional body. We often get asked by organizations to source material so that people can go on specific training interventions. So then it's adequate, you need your adequate and relevant work experience, well-developed communication skills. And now you're starting to look at management skills and your strategic skills, which you wouldn't have necessarily needed as a candidate. Ethical behavior, and Tanya also talked about this. And one of the things that people aren't aware of with your professional body is that people sometimes do get complaints about them, and people are rightly or wrongly sent to us, you know, as having done something wrong. It's our role to protect you and the profession. So we are kind of like your insurance. Now, if it turns out that you had done something wrong, then that will go through the correct procedures of whether it needs to go to the police or whatever. But we also have to support you to, and hopefully find you innocent. And all of that is free of charge. So it's almost like your professional body is your insurance policy should something go wrong. Sorry. So CPD, people often mistake it for being very onerous and time-consuming. We've tried to make it as simple as possible. In your 5 years that you have a 5-year cycle, and over that cycle, you need to get 25 CPD points, which in the first point seems like a lot. But if you break it down into your year, you can need to get 1 or 2 points in category 1. Now, those are the points that you get for attending a workshop, attending an online seminar, doing something related to your industry. And with the new online system and with the support of the VAs, most scientists are, especially in your field, there are plenty of activities where you can accrue these points. The next category is category 2, and that's where you can go through your work. Excuse me, sorry, and you can get 2 points just for working. You also get points for mentoring, which again Tanya talked about. It's important once you have been mentored that you now turn around and give back and become a mentor. And for mentoring, you also get CPD points. And then in category 3, there's points for anything else, really. It sounds a bit vague, but there are many activities that people do. If you're a referee for someone, you can get CPD points. If you go and do outreach, and you can get CPD points. We're working with an organization at the moment, which we're quite excited about, called Jive Media. And they want scientists to go into schools. And even if it's just for an hour or so, it doesn't have to be a long-term commitment to talk to kids about registration, sorry, not registration, about science. So, you know, there's a lot of activity, and, you know, it's reading papers as well. It's a bit of an honesty system, but it's quite easy for you to accrue those points. We often get the question, what if I become unemployed? What if I can't? We're not sitting here with a big stick. That's not the intention of it. If you can clearly motivate that you've really been unable to do this, you've been ill, you've been out of work, there isn't going to be any repercussions. You know, we have to, and especially with COVID and the limitations that have been imposed on people, that it just keep looking for stuff to do. And we have a service provider, and he's very keen to keep helping people get their events accredited for CPD. So we have a code of conduct. Before you can even print your certificate, you have to sign to say that you accept your code of conduct. And again, it's about ethics, it's about respect, it's about honesty, and it's about integrity. And these are the areas where if somebody is taken to the Professional Conduct Committee, which I was talking about earlier, it's when people breach the code of conduct that, or are perceived to have breached the code of conduct, that we get cases that are sent to us. And that's why it's important that you understand particularly the ethics surrounding your industry and the law surrounding your industry. And you know, there's a lot of legal implications, particularly, you know, in your field, that you need to understand. It's respect for, you know, the earth, the people around you. And there's areas where some of the things that have been brought to us is where people are actually saying they've qualified in one area when actually they're not. So the code of conduct, I think it's now got 14 points on it. So you just have to read and understand it and know that, you know, this is your guideline. This is your guideline for your career and for your behavior as you go forward with your career. So that is my presentation. I'm happy to answer some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so the floor is open, folks. If anybody would like to put their hand up. Michael, please go ahead.
Hi there. So I've actually applied last year in October to be a candidate, and I'm still waiting to hear whether or not I'm going to be one. So I just wanted to know what I can do. Who do I need to contact?
I'll ask Tanya to send me. Is that Michael who's talking?
Yes, yeah, Michael Ray. Yeah.
Okay. I will take a quick note because it shouldn't take that long. I'm just writing that down. It should normally only take about 3 months. Now we have had a couple of hiccups, but nothing that should have delayed your registration. So let me follow that up for you. And
yes, I can. Yeah, no. And at the point in time now, I think I have the ability to upgrade to so professional.
Okay, let me take a look for you.
Yeah,
I'll
thank
have
you
to
so
go
much.
into the database and find out.
All right. If you need any more details, I can just send you a bunch of my details so you can.
As soon as we finish this call, I will get onto that.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Michael.
Yes,
Sunday, you have another question?
Thanks, Tanya. My question is, I missed up on the issue of references. When are references required?
You'll only need a reference if you're applying as a professional natural scientist or when you upgrade from candidate to professional.
Thank you.
Eric?
Okay, thank you, Sarah. One thing that I have to ask is about students, or I may say graduates, who have went through geological engineering or engineering geology. Do they still register with SACNASP or the GSSA? Because most of the time we find that graduates from these courses, they can as well work or do the jobs or duties that students who have done geology or geological sciences, they can do, which is as well, it's always considered as the same discipline with a little bit of engineering.
I think I can answer part of that question. Registration with SACNASP depends on the amount of science that you have in your degree, which starts with your undergrad degree through to your honours. So the first year must contain 70% science, second and third years must be 80% science, and your fourth year must be 90 to 100% science. So it depends on what areas you studied. So you can only register with us as if you have sufficient science, natural science in your qualification. I don't know if Tanya can add any more to that.
No, that's right. Does that answer your question, Eric?
I'm not quite sure, but I think if you can look at the course content, or I might say the modules that are in the course that I'm talking about, maybe you might have an opinion on that with regard to what you've just said about the percentages throughout the years. So I might need to share with you the modules that are included in the program.
You can certainly do that, Eric, but generally, if you've got a science degree, there's typically no problem. It's when you have the hybrid degrees that have more non-science in it, those can sometimes be a problem. But send your curriculum to me, and I'll have a look at it and see if I can give you some advice on that.
Okay.
Tsepo?
Hi, thank you. I just want to know how long does it take to change from a candidate to a professional? And what are steps to follow? Thank you.
Sarah? Has Sarah dropped out? Okay, it looks as if Sarah's internet has crashed. Sorry, just repeat that again, Seppo.
How long does it take from being a candidate to change to a professional scientist? And what are the steps?
Typically, it depends upon getting sufficient experience, dependent upon your degree. So if you have a 4-year degree, you need to have a minimum of 3 years of experience before you can upgrade to a professional.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Pamela?
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, my question is a bit similar to Tsepo's, because mine, although I need to know with regard to prior learning, because some of us, before we decided to go, or we had a chance to go and study, for example, geology, we began as geologists as geology assistants for say 8 years, and then after 8 years, that's when you got an opportunity to go into formal studies and do your geology course. And then what I want to know, does SECNASP recognize that prior learning experience? And post the degree, before you upgrade to professionals, do they also recognize that, unlike you didn't start out from matric, went to varsity, like do they recognize that path, that okay, you had prior learning experience, and then after that you went and got the formal education? So with regard to
the simple answer is yes. Under certain circumstances, they do recognize prior learning. But you have to do the application first so that they will be able to see the specific details of your application.
I have done that application, but I want to know, and then they gave me the candidate membership, but now I want to upgrade. So I don't know if I'm supposed to wait for 3 years, because when I checked on their website, they said you must have something like 10 years experience before you actually upgrade. So now, like,
no, you need 3 years post your candidate registration. So after 3 years, then you can reapply for professional.
Okay.
Okay, and Paul?
Good day. Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to make a follow-up also on my application. I have registered and I have not received my certificate. So I just wanted to make a follow-up if they can check my status. Thank you.
When did you apply, Paul?
I applied on February.
February this year?
Yes.
That will still be in progress because they typically look at about 6 months. So from about July, August, you can start querying it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Gsa?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for the nice presentation. What I want to ask is pertaining to the CPD points. I must say I'm in panic at the moment because as well, I think me and some of my fellow geologists and my subordinates and even my superiors at work, the thing of CPD points actually became, we realized it at the end of last year that there's this CPD points. At first, we didn't think that it mattered much, but then we just realized that no, you need the 25 points in that 5 years. And now the panic that is there is that many of us, we do competent persons report, do reports for the GSC, for SEC, and we haven't been capturing anything. And now some of us, by the end of next year, it will be the end of that 5 years. Now the question is there anything that can be done in terms of, because it looks like the time that is left now to acquire all 25 points is quite short. Would that mean now for the CP reports that we write will no longer be taken as competent persons?
Gsa, it is very easy to get your CPD points. It takes a bit of time if you haven't been doing it systematically over the last couple of years. But if you take a couple of days and you just put down what you have been doing, you log what you have been doing over the last 5 years, you'll find that you'll very easily have all 25 points. In fact, these Geoskills presentations, after the 6 weeks, you'll have 3 of those points, 3 out of the 5 for category 1. Your question regarding whether you'll not be allowed to act as a competent person going forward. SACNAS has spent a lot of time and effort trying to get people to register. They're not going to very easily chuck you out and say, sorry, you can no longer be a competent person. They will give you the opportunity to get that CPD up to date, because you will have done the work, you'll have done the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You just need to now log it or register it on the website. So don't stress too much on that one.
All right, no, thank you.
Okay, Kerry?
Yes, thank you. Mine's a very generic question. You mentioned earlier about hybrid degrees and their eligibility for registration. Does that imply that some of the courses or some of the qualifications offered by higher education institutions are not eligible for SACNAS registration? And if so, is there a list somewhere that tells us which those are?
That is the largest can of worms that one could ever have expected, Carrie, because there are so many different problems with that. SACNASP realizes that currently these hybrid degrees, if the regulation was applied strictly, then people would not be able to register. So they are changing their regulations in order to be able to make it work. And so it's not as big a problem as it might be, but there are some degrees that are a bit of a stretch. But as long as the person is working in the science field and has got a reasonable number of science courses within it, it's not a problem.
Thank you. I imagine that this will also become more pertinent as the years go by, especially because we're considering, collaboration, the Internet of Things, technological advancements. So I'll definitely keep my eye on that. Thank you very much for the answer, Tanya.
Yeah, pleasure. Leonita, you had a question that says about SACNASP not approving the field of practice. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, thanks. I thought it was just a short one. So I just saw on my application, I've been registered a while. I just haven't spent as much time as I would have wanted. So I just wanted to know, in terms of them saying referred, because I remember you could choose 2 or more than 1 field of practice. So does that referred then mean that that wasn't approved, but the second one was approved? Because it's the active field of practice.
What normally happens in a situation like that is that the reviewer of the documents thought that your degree and your experience was better suited to the one field of practice as opposed to the other. Are
Okay,
you
so you
talking
would
about the geological sciences as opposed to earth sciences?
Yes, because we had that quarrel, I think, at the end of our studies, because we were at Poach and they have so our BSc in geology is more towards your environmental side, but some of the students felt that they would like to register as a geologist, and there were conversations up and down about that. So I think that's where the whole the whole question came about of us applying as a geologist or an environmental scientist.
Personally,
If that makes sense.
There's not a huge amount of difference between earth science and geological sciences once you are registered. So whichever one they thought that you were more suited for, it's purely an academic or an administrative issue. It's not going to prevent you from working in whichever field you want to.
Okay, no, that's great to hear then. Thanks.
Gsa, a question from you about the procedure for registration as practitioners from outside of South Africa. You go through the same application as anybody else, but you will need to apply to SAQA, which is the qualifications authority, to get your external degree evaluated in terms of the level of the South African degree, but otherwise it's pretty much the same procedure. Shime, you have a question that you'd like to ask?
Yes, good morning, everyone. I have 2 questions which are quick. The one is, what happens after 5 years? Because most of us, the SACNASP CPD points were almost a year already into when they were introduced to geology, and then when we started picking up that we needed to pick up points. So we're already now on the 5th year. So what happens after 5 years if you haven't accumulated 25 points? If maybe say you're short of like 5 points or something. And the second question will be, we've picked up that SACNASP on their courses on the portal there, it's mostly from Enterprise University of Pretoria. Do they have appetite to increase the scope of courses, or if not, the other people who offer geology courses or geoscience courses, how do we get them to register the courses they offer to us onto their system? Do we manually have to ask them to go to SACNASP to put their course on the system, or are we able to put our courses in evidence without having them to find them on the drop down on their drop list? Thank you.
Okay. If you want to have a course added to the SACNASP dropdown, you have to get the organization to apply to SACNASP to have it evaluated before it can be put on the dropdown. So yes, you have to go to the course and ask them to contact SACNASP. Are you a member of the GSSA?
Yes, I am.
Okay. If you don't have much luck with them, then send me a mail and I'll see what I can do to follow that up for you. But try them first.
Okay, thank you.
And the first part of your question, sorry, I've forgotten that one.
I was asking since most, like Keshu mentioned, most of
yes,
us.
That's right. The SACNASP will give you an amount of time to be able to make sure that you have things up to date. They're not going to chuck you out month one afterwards, but they will expect you to get there in time. Okay, do we have any more questions? Okay, in which case we're going to break for tea. Now you will have noticed we have gone over time according to the program. That is on purpose because we have to change the program a little bit because Bryony is not going to be able to come talk to us today. So we're going to swap a couple of presentation, another one directly after tea, and then Bryony will fit in the next couple of weeks. So let us go and have some tea, go make your coffee, go take your muffins out of the oven, and we will see you at 11:30. But before you go, I would like you please to fill out another poll. Let me get it. Okay, if you would fill out that poll, then please go and get yourself some coffee and we will start again at 11:30 for the next presentation. We will still take questions during tea time if you have anything that you want to ask.
Go get some coffee, Tanya. Your throat must be dry.
So you're kidding. I don't know what happened to Sarah. Her internet must have crashed. Sarah Hoyer.
Hi, thank you. Yes, so just regarding obviously follow on, I asked a question in the chat, and then obviously a couple of people also had the similar type problem. Let's say, for example, now the one lady that hadn't got all her points and now the cycle's coming to an end and she needs to accumulate quite a bit of points, let's say within the next year. Is there, I know for Gsa, the engineering council, there's a limit on the number of points you can get every year. So the question is there a limit for SACNASP?
There's not a limit of how many points you can get every year. So you can do, for example, for category 1, you can do all 5 of your category 1 points in the 5th year. It's recommended that you do one per year because then it's less onerous than having to do all 5 at the end of the period. So no, you can do all 25 of your points in the last year, or you can spread it out over the period.
Okay, thank you. And then, sorry, just a follow-up question on that is, so I know the stipulation is it needs to come from 2 categories. So the weighting is obviously, there's no stipulation on the weighting. So I could get 15 points from category 1 and only 5 or the rest, the remaining from category 3, let's say, and that would be accepted.
Yes, you have to get 5 category 1 points. And the rest can come from whichever category you like.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
There's a question here in the chat from, it doesn't show, but it regards about the information that you can do for CPD if you are unemployed. If you go to the presentation that I just gave you on professionalism, there are 2 slides there that will help you to decide what it is that you can do. Now, of course, that presentation is or will be available on the YouTube or on as a recording. It will be sent to you. Otherwise, if you send me an email via the GSSA, I'll put that on a mail back to you. With respect to the question regarding the GSSA lunchtime talks, can you log the CPD points from the time GSSA started offering them? The answer is absolutely yes. You don't have to log your points from what is happening now. You can log your points going back, in SACNAF's case, 5 years. In terms of the GSSA, you can go back to 2014 and you can log points from there.
Thanks, Tanya.
Okay, Nolene, you take over answering questions. I need to get coffee.
Okay. I'm here for you. Great, Gsa. Tanya, are you back?
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I just poured coffee all over myself.
I was wondering what was happening. I thought you burnt your hands when you took the muffins out the oven.
The dog ate the muffins.
Oh no.
There's a question here from Tyrone about CPD points from different institutions. If you do a CPD training course accredited by Eurogel, OSIMM, SGL, will these points be accepted by SACNASP? Yes, but you need to get it accredited by SACNASP before it can get put onto the drop-down list. Now, what I would suggest that you do is send it through to me via the GSSA, and we'll get it put onto the list.
Tanya, can you just also answer Alicia? Her comment is now at the bottom of the chat. Just above Tyrone.
Are you able to use Gsa CPD on your SACNASP profile? Again, you can use those courses, but they need to be accredited by SACNASP as well as by Gsa. So you've got to get the organization to apply to SACNASP to have it registered. Again, if you run into hassle, speak to Johan or speak to myself. So I just got to go on mute for a. It's a question from Amalia trying to log into your GSSA account, but it says it has been disabled. Best thing to do with that is to send an email to info@gssa.org.za, and Sally or Lally will sort that out for you. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share that with you.
Tanya, I found that very interesting.
Very interesting. We saw pretty much the same pattern last year, Noli.
We absolutely did. We did. So yeah, very interesting.
Are there any other questions? We've still got about 4 minutes before we start again. Just going through the chat to make sure I haven't missed any. There's a question here from Arno. As a student currently doing honours, do you recommend that we register while we're studying, or that we must do it after we complete it? That's really irrelevant. It's always useful to be a student member of, say, the GSSA, for example. But for SACNASP, it's best to have your degree and your transcript of your honours when you register. So you need to have graduated before you apply. I've always found that that is the most efficient way of doing it. Okay, so we're now going to move on to the next presentation. and we're going to be talking about the SAM codes. Nolene, will you confirm once I share my screen that I've actually got the correct?
Okay. Show me, yeah.
So you're seeing my presentation screen?
I'm seeing your presentation screen.
Okay, cool. Okay, so when it comes to mining, there are very few individual companies out there that can go out and prospect and mine using their own money. Most have to attract investment from somewhere. Now, as investors, we've got so much of a choice as to where we're going to put our money, whether it be in a mining company, whether it be in a pharmaceutical company, or wherever. So how do we know where best to invest? How do we know that punters are telling us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth when they tell us that their project is wonderful and that if we give them all of our money, they're going to double it within a year? How do we know that there are actually diamonds in the ground, or that they can run a mine successfully in the middle of the Kalahari, or that they can actually recover lithium sustainably, and so on? This is where the mineral reporting codes become important. They are standards that are fundamental to keeping the minerals industry honest. The SAM codes, which is the South African Mineral Reporting Codes, sets out the minimum standards, recommendations, and guidelines for all public reporting of mineral issues in South Africa. Today, we're going to have a brief look at how these mineral reporting codes developed and why they are important in the lives of geoscientists. And then we're going to look fairly superficially at what the code compliance means. Now, just as a commercial punt, if you want to know more about the details of the SAM codes, there is an on-demand introduction to SAM codes and JSD listing requirements available on the YouTube channel. And there will also be an online conference, SAM codes conference, later in the year. So where did it all come from? Well, to start with, I'd like to take you back to the late 1960s, to the heady days of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and the Poseidon nickel bubble. At that time, the Vietnam War was in full swing. The price of nickel was climbing daily as materials were needed to support the war effort. In Australia, a company called Poseidon struck what looked to be a decent-sized nickel deposit. That was in 1969. Now, in 1 year, based more on corporate promotion than real technical data, their shares on the Australian Stock Exchange rose from 80 cents to over $280. And that was before they'd even started production. But that was when things started going pear-shaped. The mining costs were much higher than they expected. The grade was much lower than they initially thought. And to make matters worse, the Vietnam War had ended and the price of nickel crashed. Within 5 years, the company had imploded and was delisted from the ASX, and investors lost millions. After a number of serious investigations, they realized that if there had been more robust technical reporting procedures, would not have been such a problem. And so in 1989, the JORC code was born to guide what information companies needed to report on the Australian Stock Exchange. So now we fast forward to the mid-1990s to Indonesia, where we have a junior explorer from Canada called Briex They had just identified a gold deposit at Busang on the island of Borneo. And I'd like you to watch the following video.
One man masterminds the largest gold mining scam in history.
Surely one of the biggest frauds in the history of the world, probably the biggest mining fraud of all time.
He outwitted scientists, analysts, and the world's leading investors.
There was always some science backing up this fraud.
He turned a penny stock into $1 billion scam and made himself millions. Find out how, next on Masterminds. On December 13th, 1993, a lone prospector entered the darkest jungles of Borneo and discovered the biggest gold strike of the 20th century.
These series of jungle hills in Indonesia, which all had been formed by a volcano, were lying on top of a pool of gold.
The prospector staked a claim on behalf of a small mining company named Brex. He ordered rock samples drilled and sent for testing.
There was some interesting core results, and it seemed like this could be one of those junior plays that made people a lot of money.
Independent auditors assessed the size of the gold deposit as astronomical.
And they started to realize that they had what they thought was an elephant deposit, a great big puddle of gold.
Brex stock took off like a rocket. The prospector used the money to expand his operation. He cleared hundreds of acres of jungle and brought in sophisticated excavation machinery.
The analysts on Bay Street and Wall Street got caught up in the excitement.
And every time they published more details about this gold find in Indonesia, the market capitalization of the company, the size of the company, would jump.
This company went from $1 or $2 to $286.
This was the largest gold deposit in the world.
Back in Indonesia, the prospector kept uncovering more and more gold.
Gold was trading at $350 US an ounce. If you multiply it out, it's about $70 billion US.
Fueled by greed, everyone from boardroom executives to middle-class suburbanites wanted in on the action.
Everybody wanted to be the suitor to walk down the aisle with Brex.
Even the corrupt Indonesian government tried to muscle in. But what no one knew was, there was no gold, not 1 ounce. The lone prospector cashed in his company's stock options and made off with millions, leaving investors devastated.
People who have basically put a lot of their life savings into Brex lose everything. And I know of several individuals who committed suicide.
The prospector had engineered an unparalleled gold rush, outsmarting scientists, analysts, and investors. His name was Michael de Guzman. The question is, how did he do it? Michael de Guzman has convinced the world to invest in a gold mine that isn't there, turning a penny stock into $1 billion venture and lining his pockets with millions.
Michael de Guzman was a Filipino geologist who worked in Indonesia.
For years, de Guzman struggles for recognition in an industry dominated by large American mining companies.
Mike de Guzman knew he was smart, he had fabulous marks, he had an engineering degree, but he never got a great job. He never got a crack at a great job. It's very difficult for the Filipinos, even with extremely good engineering training, to get senior jobs with the big mining companies.
While exploring the jungles of Borneo, de Guzman devises a plan to make himself rich. Unable to get the support he needs to find a gold mine, he decides to invent one.
Michael de Guzman was going to get the wealth that he could never aspire to otherwise.
De Guzman reasons that the most convincing site for the world's largest gold mine is on the Indonesian island of Borneo.
in the area around Indonesia is an area which is quite unusually rich in gold. Gold mines are associated with volcanic activity quite a bit, so areas where you get volcanoes, people find gold mines.
De Guzman concocts a geological theory to capitalize on what the experts already believe.
And the theory essentially was where there are extinct volcanoes, you're going to kind of have a plug of minerals like gold that are fairly close to the surface.
Now de Guzman must find someone with credibility to sell his idea to the world. He targets geologist John Felderhoff.
John Felderhoff is the very sort of person you would imagine that would be crazy enough to go through the jungles of Kalimantan or Borneo, wearing hip waders and looking for gold.
He had actually a well-established reputation of having discovered a gold mine in Indonesia.
De Guzman convinces Felderhoff to find a foreign investor who's willing to take risks and not ask questions. Felderhoff recommends a businessman from Calgary.
David Walsh was this promoter. He'd been bankrupt. He'd been sort of living out of the trunk of his car. He was the kind of guy who was always talking up a story.
Walsh is flown to Indonesia, where he's wined and dined in the finest hotel in Jakarta.
Walsh was at a point where he was looking for some promising properties, and he spent basically his last few bucks to take a trip to Indonesia.
With nothing more than a few rocks, maps, and some questionable data, De Guzman sells Walsh on investing 80 grand on a property in Borneo that he's never even seen. It's called Busang.
The thing that made the Bre-X fraud credible in everybody's eyes was that one of the largest gold mines in the world is in the Indonesian islands, about 70 miles away from what became Busang.
In exchange for their work exploring Busang, De Guzman demands stock options for himself and Felderhoff. Now De Guzman sets out to turn this penny stock company into a corporation worth billions. He starts by hiring a young Filipino staff, over which he has total control.
Well, the person really in charge on site in Busang was Michael de Guzman.
De Guzman orders his team to drill core samples. Once extracted, the core sample is split in two. Typically, half is stored on site. The other half is then crushed and sent to a lab to be tested, determining how much gold is present. But because de Guzman knows the property has no gold, he employs an age-old mining trick called salting.
Salting refers to adding gold to the ore. Usually what would happen is you'd have a gold mine and you'd go there and you'd take gold nuggets, sprinkle it around the way you'd sprinkle salt around.
De Guzman orders the crushed rock moved to a locked shed, where he's sure to have absolute privacy. Inside, he devises an ingenious method of salting the samples, with gold filed from his wedding ring.
Adding it to the ground up rock. As far as I know, that's not been done before. That was a novel twist.
The challenge to Michael is then taking 40 pounds of rock, figuring out exactly how many gold flakes should go in there. In other words, there's 3 ounces of gold per ton of rock. So he's got to do a fair amount of division, and he's got to carefully weigh out his gold.
If he'd grabbed a teaspoonful and chucked it in, the gold grade would have been phenomenal. And people would have gone, and it would have attracted attention.
De Guzman's calculations are perfect. The lab results suggest high levels of gold without raising suspicion. De Guzman has his frontman, John Felderhoff, call David Walsh at his home in Calgary and tell him the good news. The lab results are the equivalent of a hot tip.
The market came to really look forward to these results. You know, there'd be a big excitement. Walsh would say, on Tuesday, we should have core results for you. Tuesday would come, sure enough, there'd be 10 or 12 new holes.
As each consecutive lab result is posted, it appears that more and more gold is being found in Busang. Investors rush to buy Bre-X shares listed on the Alberta Stock Exchange. There's so much drilling at Busang that de Guzman needs a larger supply of gold in order to keep salting the thousands of samples.
There's a lot of local Indonesian natives who make their living, or at least a part of their living, by panning for gold in the rivers. Michael befriended this fellow and started buying gold off him. So over a period of about 2 years, Michael bought about $61,000 worth of gold off this guy.
Meanwhile, investors anxious to get in on the deal send over an independent auditor to review all de Guzman's records. The auditor demands to see de Guzman's core samples. But de Guzman hasn't saved half the samples.
They did split their core all right, but they only kept 10 centimeters out of every meter. That's very unusual.
To prevent the auditor from becoming suspicious, de Guzman is ready with an explanation. He cites a phenomenon called the nugget effect, in which the gold is distributed unevenly. De Guzman insists he must crush all of the sample in order to get an accurate reading.
The key was crushing up all the core. Nobody could check. By having crushed up all the core, basically they destroyed the evidence.
But when the auditor takes a closer look at the samples, he's suspicious about the river gold purchased by de Guzman.
The gold you get from panning in a river looks quite different from the gold that you find at the bottom of a gold mine. River gold gets rounded around the edges. The flakes of gold are shaped by the forces of the water and the weather.
De Guzman uses his theory of volcanic pools to explain why this kind of gold is precisely what you would expect at Busang. Within hours, the BRIEX website announces the successful audit and the stock rises dramatically.
You could watch this stock move. It would go from $20 to $30 in the space of 3 weeks.
Building on his success with the auditor, de Guzman now moves to drive the stock price even higher.
They looked at their maps and they said, okay, well, if there's gold here, maybe there'll be gold over here as well. And that's when they got into Busang 2.
De Guzman finds enough surface gold to convince David Walsh to finance drilling for what he claims is a second massive gold deposit. Once again, de Guzman has Felderhoff fire off a message to David Walsh. We've got a monster by the tail. Walsh pounces on it. He applies for BRIEX to be listed on the NASDAQ and the Toronto Stock Exchange.
Wall Street and investors elsewhere and analysts elsewhere, we're totally on side, we're totally enthusiastic, we're totally hypnotized by the rising stock price, by the rising claims of BRIEX.
Now de Guzman makes his boldest claim. Based on drilling results from Busang 2, he declares that BRIEX has the largest gold deposit in the world.
The investors just looked at the rising stock price and said, this must be real.
Having built BRIEX into a company worth $6 billion, and with its stock price at nearly $300 a share, it's time for de Guzman to start cashing in. He and his team sell enough shares to be rewarded with over $100 million.
When Felderhoff and when Walsh and when de Guzman started selling a part of their holdings, but not all of it, people just figured, well, that's just guys who've had a tough run all their lives, and they're just taking out some insurance.
De Guzman is now worth millions. But what he doesn't know is the Indonesian government is about to make a move that threatens to reveal his scam. Michael de Guzman has pulled off the biggest fraud in mining history. He's fooled the world's leading investors, turned a penny stock into $1 billion venture, and lined his pockets with millions. But he's now facing a real crisis.
The beginning of the end for BRIEX was a problem in Indonesia. The Indonesian government, which is hideously corrupt, decides to challenge BRIEX's claim to this fabulous deposit.
In August of 1996, the Indonesian government revokes BRIEX's exploration permit and opens the property to other mining companies.
The government itself was going to get very much involved in the ownership of the deposit. And they were going to invite who they wanted to see to develop the deposit.
So what you saw unfold in rather ugly fashion between the summer of 1996 and the spring of 1997 was fight amongst major companies for a piece of the action.
Michael de Guzman knows his drilling records will soon come under scrutiny from the other mining companies, a move that's sure to reveal the Bre-X fraud. Desperate, he destroys all his records at Busang, claiming it was an accidental fire.
What went up in smoke that day would ultimately help cover the trail of the conspirators that did this fraud.
The Indonesian government forces Bre-X to accept a new mining partner, Freeport-McMoRan. From now on, Bre-X owns only 45% of Busang. When news gets out, Bre-X stock drops $1 billion. But de Guzman counters. He releases new drilling results that dramatically increase the estimated gold reserves underground.
They had previously said that they had 57 million reserves, and they increased that to slightly over 70 million reserves. Given that the ownership that they had in percentage went down, to make the value be the same, they had to increase the reserves.
Bre-X stock rises again. Shareholders are thrilled. In the spring of 1997, de Guzman and his team are invited to be guests of honor at Bre-X's annual shareholder meeting in Toronto.
Michael de Guzman made a presentation as part of the Bre-X annual meeting to talk about what he'd found and to talk about what the different drill results had proven was underneath the ground. He was able to stand before shareholders with this fabulously expensive stock, a company that was worth $5 billion, and said, look, we did the best deal we could under the circumstances. He was able to stand before shareholders with this fabulously expensive stock, a company that was worth $5 billion, and said, look, we did the best deal we could under the circumstances. We're all rich. Isn't this great?
He was widely applauded, considered a hero. His theories of mining, even though they were slightly unusual, seemed to be validated by the results.
But on the other side of the world, Bre-X's new partner is anxiously drilling for gold, only yards away from where de Guzman had drilled.
And their samples came up empty. They weren't finding the gold that Michael de Guzman had said was there.
De Guzman got the phone call, we don't seem to find any of the gold you say is there. Get your story behind, back to Indonesia pronto, pal, and explain this to us.
After 3 years and billions of dollars, time is running out for the mastermind behind the world's largest fraud. Returning to Indonesia, de Guzman faces serious accusations from his new mining partner.
The next morning, he climbs into the back of a helicopter driven by a Indonesian Air Force officer, takes off over the jungle. He's about 400 or 500 feet in the air over some of the deepest rainforest in all of Indonesia. And the pilot looked into the back seat, and de Guzman was gone. De Guzman had jumped out of the helicopter, apparently.
3 days later, the Indonesian army claims to find de Guzman's body. It's badly decomposed and partially eaten by animals. It's so gruesome, the authorities won't let his family view the remains.
It was very difficult to believe that they took 2-3 days, I recall, to find the body, when in fact the pilot said he did set the GPS recorder, so they should have been able to find the spot.
Rumors swirl about de Guzman's death. Was it suicide, murder, or yet another perfectly planned deception?
If you wanted to disappear anywhere on this planet, Indonesia would be one of the easier places to do it. That you could, for a few $100s, purchase a recently deceased body.
Independent drilling takes place directly beside where de Guzman took thousands of samples, and not a single ounce of gold is found.
They go and they drill their own core samples, and the security they have around that is unmatched. They are drilling 2 or 3 feet away from where Bre-X says there's tons of gold. all they find is rock flake. There is no gold there.
It looks so good, it couldn't be real. I mean, it's too good to be real.
It's an unbelievable revelation. They just can't believe that this fabulous deposit, in fact, never existed.
Investors around the world suddenly realize they've been had.
Walsh is just flabbergasted. He cannot believe that this is happening. And it's that point that the Bre-X team in Toronto realizes that they've got nothing to go on, that their stock is going to zero because this was a massive fraud. The shares themselves are only useful as wallpaper.
David Walsh adamantly denies any knowledge of the fraud. He moves to the Bahamas with his wife. 2 years later, he dies of a massive heart attack.
John Felderhoff continues to live in a gorgeous home right next to the yacht club in the Cayman Islands, where there's no tax and there's also no extradition treaty with Canada for white-collar crimes.
Michael de Guzman, the mastermind behind the greatest mining scam of all time, is supposedly laid to rest.
I compare him to Rumpelstiltskin. He was able to turn a very small amount of gold into a huge amount. He spun a story into a huge amount of gold.
No criminal charges have arisen out of the Bre-X scandal. No one has ever spent a day in jail as a result of it.
The fraud itself has changed the way that Canadian regulators look at the mining industry.
It would be somewhat more difficult to pull off a similar type of scam, but it isn't impossible. It's probably still could be done again.
The adage, caveat emptor, is indeed true. Buyer beware.
In spite of class action lawsuits, not one investor has ever been compensated. A harsh reality for thousands of ordinary people who invested their life savings in Bre-X and were left penniless.
I actually believe that Michael de Guzman is alive. I don't think that he did fall out of that helicopter. I believe that he faked his own death and that he's enjoying the money that he scammed at Bre-X.
I also believe that Michael de Guzman is living somewhere in the Caribbean. However, the scam of Bre-X led to the fact that the stock exchange, the stock exchanges in Canada developed the CIM code, which they then required anybody listed in Canada to adhere to. South Africa also saw the writing on the wall, and in the year 2000, we also developed our own SAMREC code for anybody listing on the stock exchange. These various countries who were then developing their own independent resource or reserve reporting standards all came together to develop a company, or a committee rather, called CRISCO, which is the Committee for Mineral Reserves International Reporting Standards. It's basically the umbrella body comprised of representatives from a number of different organizations. And currently there are about 14 member nations, and they each have their own national reporting code, but the reporting code is based on a common template. You can see in the map, the countries that are already associated with CRISCO, and those which are developing their own and coming along include places like China, Mozambique, Argentina, Bolivia, and the Philippines. It's interesting that over 80% of listed companies worldwide report to one or other of the CRISCO compliant codes. As we've said before, this was mostly driven by the listing requirements for various stock exchanges. And what you see in this table here are the various stock exchanges and the reporting code that is required by that stock exchange. For example, if you're listed in Australia, you need to report according to JORC. In Johannesburg, it's the SAM codes. Toronto, it's the CIM. In the US, it's the new SK 1300. London, Hong Kong, and Frankfurt, so that you can report according to any code as long as it is a Crisco related.
That's fine. I'm going to leave the meeting now, right?
Please, can you mute your microphone?
Sorry?
So irrespective of where...
Yeah, I'm going to go now, right? Okay, the meeting is finished. No, it's still carrying on.
Nolene, if you'll just mute everybody, please. So irrespective of where the project is located, it's where the company is listed that determines the reporting code to be used. So if we look at Africa, we have a number of stock exchanges throughout Africa. If you want to list on the JSE, it requires compliance with the SAM codes. The stock exchanges here in Francophone West Africa report in accordance with the Canadian CIM standards because they have very close relationships with the exchanges, particularly the French exchange in Canada. Most of all of the oil producing countries, they would report according to PRMS, which is the Petroleum Resource Management System. It's interesting to note that no other stock exchange in Africa currently has any specific mineral reporting requirements. Possibly because most of the mineral listings are secondary listings, and it is required of your primary listing, that is where you need to report. Alternatively, some of the exchanges in Africa don't see the value of having a reporting code. Now, some of you will have heard of the UNFC resource management system. Don't confuse that with the Crisco style public reporting standard. This presentation is about public reporting according to a Crisco code. We'll touch very briefly on the UNFC later in this presentation. So what is the point of all of these codes? Well, primarily they are there as a protection. If they're applied properly, they can act as a protection for investors, for the state, for the local communities, and even the project owners. Also the consultants who sign off on these technical reports. The codes are there as a protection, and they do work. They just have to be used by companies and stock exchanges. That's why you as geologists need to know what these codes are all about so that you don't land up in a similar situation as the Felderhofs of this world. The codes also provide a standard set of definitions so that investors can understand exactly what is being offered. For example, if your report talks about measured resources or a pre-feasibility study, the investor will then know exactly how much work is being done on the property and what the level of the confidence is in the results and so on. So if he has a choice between a diamond project with inferred resources in Angola or another one with the same classification in Finland, he knows that the technical information available is at the same level. And so he can then make an informed decision as to where he's going to invest. Now, you'd think that with all these codes in place, that the original problems caused by Poseidon and Bre-X would have disappeared. Well, not really. Some of you, I'm sure, will remember the Enron debacle of 2001, where the earnings were overstated by millions of dollars. Also in 2004, when Royal Dutch Shell overstated their proved reserves by 4.5 billion barrels. We even had a diamond scandal on the Seoul Stock Exchange in 2011, where a company exploring in Africa overstated its reserves by 736 million carats, which is 5 times the annual global production at that time. And this was before they'd even put a hole in the ground. So the codes are there as a protection, and they do work. The caveat is that they actually have to be used by companies and stock exchanges, and not just as a box-ticking exercise. Right, the rest of this presentation is going to focus directly on the South African SAM codes. Just to note that the basic principles are the same for all the other jurisdictions. All the other CRISCO-related codes have the same basic principles. Just be aware that detailed listing requirements are going to vary from place to place. So while knowing the SAM codes will give you a basic knowledge of all the codes, if you're going to write a CPR for a different stock exchange, a different jurisdiction, just make sure that you know their rules as well. The South African mineral reporting codes are known as the SAM codes. And the SAM codes family basically has 3 codes, 2 guideline documents, and an associated national standard. The codes being the SAMREC, SAMVEL, and SAMOG code, which deal with public reporting of exploration results, mineral resources, and mineral reserves, the public reporting of the valuation of mineral assets, and the public reporting of oil and gas, as well as the valuation of those deposits. The guidelines refer to the environmental, social, and governance issues, and there's also a specific diamond and gemstone guideline. And then the national standard, which is affiliated, is the SANS 10320, which is the South African Bureau of Standards document for evaluating coal deposits. In South Africa, the SAM codes are administered by the SAM Code Standards Committee, the SAC. The SAC is comprised of representatives from 15 different interested and affected organizations, as well as the chairpersons of each of the 4 code committees. Now, as you can see, the bodies making up this committee are extremely varied. Shows the wide application of the codes and also the extremely variable input, which makes them relevant across the entire extractive industries. The SAC is responsible for the administration of the codes. We provide training, we deal with complaints, we look at issues of reciprocity across the different jurisdictions. We are also represented on CRISCO and MVEL to make sure that we are always in line with what's happening internationally. And it is under the auspices and financing from the GSSA and the SAIMM. The codes provide a minimum standard of public reporting. We're not talking about best practice. We're not talking about something that reports should aspire to be. It is the lowest standard that is acceptable by project owners and investors. Now, because a document is written in compliance of the SAMREC code, for example, it doesn't give you a guarantee of quality or that that project is going to succeed. It just tells you it has been compiled in compliance with the guidelines of the SAM codes. It also includes a complaints procedure. So if you are convinced that you have been subject to a bad or fraudulent reporting, you have some place that you can complain to. Again, in South Africa, the codes are intertwined with other applicable aspects of public reporting, It's contained within the JSE listing rules. It's trying to get closer to the MPRDA and the DMR. And we also intertwined with all sorts of definitions required within financial auditing and accounting. Now, in all the previous slides, we've spoken about SAM Code's application to public reporting. Definition of a public report is that any report that is prepared for the purpose of informing investors or potential investors and their advisors. The best known of the public report is the Competent Persons Report, the CPR. This is the document that is submitted to stock exchanges or that is required by private investors. But public reports are not just stock exchange documents. We look at our definition. They can also include any and all documents that can land up in the public domain. And these might include documents on social media, technical presentations, regulatory reports. Not all public reports are CPRs, but every document that you write should be written in accordance with SAM Code's principles, because you just never know where something you write is going to land up. I can't tell you how many times I've seen a document that was written for personal use or for board discussion purposes only lands up as a proposal on some investor's desk. So write every document as though someone will be checking up on you. What this means is, if you're writing a public report and use a word or a concept defined in any of the codes, it must have that meaning and that meaning only. So if you're writing a report and you use the term mineral resources, you can't say, in this document, I defined mineral resources as however you're going to define it. If you use the term, it must mean what the code says it means. And here is a list of all the words, concepts in the code that must be used with their specific meaning and definition only. Also, you need to remember that because SAM Code compliance is written into the Gsa Code of Ethics, you as a member of that body are obliged to use the correct terminology in any document that you write, and also conform to the basic principles. The three guiding principles of the codes are materiality, transparency, and competence. So that means that when you're writing your document, you need to provide all the relevant information that someone is going to reasonably require in order to make a reasoned and balanced judgment. This information must be clear and unambiguous, and must not be misleading. Also remember that not all of your readers are technical experts. So don't only present the bare bones of an argument that only someone with 20 years experience would understand, or something that is so full of technical jargon that you need to have a dictionary on hand for every sentence. You want to develop the art of writing reports in plain language, such that the average layperson can understand, but without watering down or compromising the technical content. So who writes these things? We've spoken about the competent person. Definition of a competent person is someone who can sign off on a public report. It's defined in the codes as someone who's got the necessary registration and experience. So this goes back to what we spoke about in a previous presentation, registration is vitally important if you're going to want to sign off as a competent person sometime in the future. The registration requirements according to the SAMREC code is you need to be registered with either a particular statutory professional body or a representative professional organization. The statutory and professional bodies are SACNASP, Gsa, SAGC, which is the Geomatics Council, the GSSA, the SAIMM, or IMSA, again, that is the surveying organization. The recognized professional organization, these can be local or international bodies. There's a list on the SAM code website for reference. If you are registered with a statutory or professional body, this also implies other obligations such as CPD and adhering to a code of ethics. The other parameter of a competent person is that they have a minimum of 5 years relevant experience in the type of deposit, the style of mineralization, and the activity being reported. So, for example, if you've got experience with alluvial diamonds, you probably have sufficient experience to handle many other placer deposits. Same deposit type, though it's a different commodity. But experience in alluvial diamonds doesn't necessarily allow you to sign off on kimberlites or vice versa. Even though it's the same commodity, the style of mineralization is very different. Also, if you've got, say, 10 years of experience in logging core, it doesn't mean you can automatically sign off on mineral resources. Or if you've got experience in signing off on mineral resources, doesn't necessarily mean you can sign off on mineral reserves. If you're going to sign off on mineral resources or mineral reserves, you have to have experience in mineral resource or mineral reserve estimation. So the foundation for all the reporting codes is SAMREC. This is applicable to solid minerals only, which means that water is excluded. SAMREC deals with the reporting of exploration results, mineral resources, and mineral reserves. The first code was written in the year 2000, and there have been various updates and rewrites since then, the latest one being in 2016. It's a Crisco-based code, which means although it is specific to South Africa and the JSE listing rules, it is an international standard and can be applied elsewhere. The other advantage of it is it non-technical professionals such as accountants, investment analysts, financial consultants, mineral lawyers, and so forth, who need to understand certain issues relating to resources while doing their jobs, can also easily understand and apply it. The basis of the SAMREC code is Figure 1. In fact, the basis for all Crisco codes is Figure 1. And this defines the categories into which results are classified. So it starts here with exploration results, which refers to the reporting of drill data, sample data, geophysics, geochem, survey data, any and all data and information that you collect during your exploration program. Then as your program progresses and you get more information and improve the confidence in your results, we can get to mineral resources. The subdivisions of inferred, indicated, and measured refers to the amount of confidence and continuity that you can demonstrate in the data. The important word being demonstrate. Then, as we apply various modifying factors, we can move across to the mineral reserve section. These modifying factors, which are metallurgy, mining, infrastructure, economics, marketing, legal, environmental, social, governmental factors, these all define for us how much of our resource can be mined commercially at a given date. We assess these parameters in pre-feasibility or feasibility studies, again, dependent on the level of detail needed to convert our resources into reserves. Diamonds and coal deposits are very special type of deposits in that their reporting requirements are quite different to other commodities. The SAMREC code contains diamond-specific clauses in the code itself, but they also reference a diamond and other gemstone guideline, which was compiled to assist with the reporting of these types of deposits. SAMREC also has coal-specific clauses, but in addition, the SAM 10320 is a national standard dealing with the details of coal reporting that also need to be considered. SAMESC, the guideline to the public reporting of environmental, social, and governance issues. This is a guideline document that has broader application than just to mineral reporting. It's got relevance to valuation of projects, to the oil and gas industry, sustainability reports, and elsewhere. It has been developed in response to the growing recognition of how important ESG issues are in the extractive industries. The purpose of the SAMESC guideline is to help CPs to know how much information to include and at what level they need to include those bits of information. And on that, just keep a lookout. We're having an ESG related workshop later in the year. Okay, so that was the SAMREC code. The second of the SAM codes is SAMVAL, which falls under MVAL, which is the equivalent body to CRISCO in order to provide some sort of international cohesion. MVAL is currently in its early stages and is not as well developed as CRISCO, but it will get there in time. A SAMVAL compliant report needs to be based on a SAMREC compliant report, or on any report that is compliant with one of the CRISCO codes. Some of the specific valuation principles to keep in mind is that it's date specific, because your project may have a completely different value on day one than it has the very next day. If, for example, the gold price, international gold price crashes for whatever reason, you're going to have a very different value on your gold mine. Other things to take into account are the basis of the valuation and the reason for valuation. We also have a competent valuator, which is similar to the competent person. The competent valuator must be properly registered and also have relevant experience. These are the ones that are going to make decisions about which valuation approach or method they're going to use. As you can see here, there are three generally accepted approaches: the cost approach, the market approach, and the income approach. SAMVAL tells us that we must apply at least two of these approaches. They're all very different. They're more or less applicable at different stages in the exploration or mining program. Here we've got a spreadsheet of some of the methods that are more applicable at certain stages of a project than others. Cost approaches, for example, are typically used in early stage exploration where we've got very limited information available, maybe only have inferred resources, or even at exploration stage. Income approaches typically used where there is the most amount of information. These are generally the discounted cash flow based methods that can only be used when you've identified a mineral reserve and based on at least a pre-feasibility study. As you can see from this table, the market-based approaches are the most versatile and can be used across the spectrum. Within each of the general approaches, there are a number of methods that can be used. Each one of these methods can be more or less applicable under specific circumstances. In July, the SAIMM has a workshop dedicated to the evaluation of mineral properties. Look out for that if valuation of properties is your interest. The third of the codes is SAMOG, and this deals with oil and gas. South Africa has a reasonably extensive oil and gas sector, got both onshore and offshore activities. And we also have a number of big international companies operational here. There are some mid-sized companies, all the way down to startups and BEE companies. Having said that we've got these guys here, the number of oil and gas companies actually listed on the JSE is nothing in comparison with those listed in Canada, USA, and Europe. And of course, all of these companies report according to the requirements of their home code and not SAMOG. So SAMOG has more applicability as a regional code currently than as an international one. But the SAMOG resource or reserve classification is based on the international PRMS system. So although we've just said that it is more a regional code, it is based on international standards and can easily be applied beyond South Africa when our oil and gas industry expands. Now, just very briefly, I want to make a couple of comments about the United Nations framework classification. This is not a public reporting standard. It was developed in the late 90s to be able to give countries and companies a classification tool for their global mineral inventory. It's not required anywhere. It's a voluntary system, though it is typically used in Europe to describe energy projects. It's an extremely complex classification system. It doesn't use mineral resources or mineral reserve classifications. It rather has this complex classification on 3 different axes, which results in 42 classification categories and subclasses, none of which we're going to go into. Just to note that these 2 different classification systems can be used successfully under different conditions. The UNFC system is a resource management system, and it's very useful for governments and corporations to manage their total resource inventories. Whereas the CRISCO reporting standard, this is the internationally accepted standard for public reporting for investment purposes. This is the document that you write when you're wanting to get money from a stock exchange, when you want to get money from a private investment. And it is also very useful for corporate reporting to the state for production reconciliation and royalty payments. And so that is where we will leave it today. There are a number of courses that the SAM Codes holds during the year. And if you would like to know more about it, please look at our website, and it'll tell you a fair amount of what's happening out there. And so I'm going to stop sharing, and I will take questions if there are any. I see there's a comment here from Andrea. Yes, Namibia does use compliance on the SAMRE code. You'll find Botswana does as well, Zimbabwe does. So a lot of them will actually use it, even though it's not, they don't have a formal code of their own. Kotatso, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for a great presentation. A lot of things that I learned today in this presentation. I would just like to ask, is there any difference, because I'm in the junior mining space or artisanal mining space as well. Is there any difference between large scale mining reporting and junior mining or artisanal mining reporting? Thanks.
The short answer is no. There's no difference in the standard of reporting. Obviously, there's a difference in the amount of information that you have, but the standard of reporting is the same.
Thanks.
There's a question here in the chat regarding access to the video. Nolene, will you just tell everybody what you're doing with respect to the recording and the YouTube channel, please?
Absolutely. Thanks, Tanya. We will put every day's recording onto the YouTube channel as it is. So it's going to have all the questions and everything that happened during the talk today. If you just go into the GSSA YouTube channel, have a look for the GeoSkills playlist. It will be public and you'll be able to view it. At the end of all our sessions, we will neaten it up and get some editing done, and then we'll replace every day's video with that.
Thank you. Sarah, you got a question?
Hi, yes, yeah, Tanya, I do. I was wondering, with regards to the amount of announcements that are being made specifically, especially at least in the space that I'm playing in is the ASX, do they do random checks as the ASX, or, do you just sort of, does the body wait until there's a complaint, or how does that sort of compliance work?
Most jurisdictions are different. Within the South African context, when you write a report for the JSE, before that document gets published on SENS, it goes through the JSE Readers Panel, and they check that it is compliant. For documents written in the non-listing space in South Africa, the professional and statutory bodies have to wait until a complaint is lodged. In Canada, they do random checks on the documentation. And I believe, but I can't attest to it, but I think the same thing happens in Australia as well. But in most of these jurisdictions, they have to wait until there is a complaint lodged by somebody.
Okay, perfect, thanks. And then I guess, with the CP, obviously you would guide them, but I was just sort of wondering, very often there are companies who go and sometimes do these releases that are not necessarily need to be signed off by a CP. So I was wondering with those ones, if they get checked or not, but you did answer my question, so thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Poppy, you have a question?
Hi, yes, thank you so much for an informative presentation. I just wanted to get clarity on the competent person signing off the public report or the CPR. Is it written by someone else and then they just come to sign it off? Or do they have to write the document themselves and then sign it off?
What happens is that the competent person has to, when they sign it off, they have to take full and complete responsibility for the document. So if they let somebody else write it and they sign it off, they are taking responsibility for something that somebody else has done. So if they want to do that, that's their head on the chopping block. Alternatively, they compile it themselves with contributions from other people that they know that they can trust. Because the person who signs off, it's their responsibility for anything that goes wrong in that report. Anybody else have a question, query?
Yes, I do, Tanya. Yes, I just have a follow-up question on what was just asked a minute ago by Poppy. I just wanted to ask, for example, if you are a geoscientist, right, and you are the project manager of a junior mining exploration project, and you are not necessarily the competent person, but you have subcontracted the competent person to work with you, and the competent person is you are doing the work with the competent person. So in that case, would the competent person sign off and still take responsibility, or is it the responsibility of the project manager?
It's the responsibility of the competent person who signs it off.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Okay, well, in that case, that brings us to the end of today's program. We look forward to seeing you all again next week, same time, same place, where we will look at, Bryony will talk to us about our CV, technical writing, mentoring, and what we'll start then on looking at what geologists need to know about other things other than geology. And we start off with South African mining law, the MPRDA, and the mining charter. So everybody have a wonderful week, and we see you again next week. Thanks for joining.
And Tanya, thanks so much. Again, running it single-handedly. We really do appreciate it.
It's my favorite course in the year.
Thank you, Tanya and team.
Thank you all. Okay, I'm going to end the session.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.